6 o'clock on Monday, August 3rd. I'm going to call to order the Winooski Liquor Control Board. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance, led by Deputy Mayor Hal Colston.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We have 2 items for approval on the agenda today. The first is a restaurant license for Friends Nepali. Any comment from staff or guests?
On behalf of staff, we have no concerns with either of these permits and recommend approval.
Great. Do we have anyone with us from Friends Nepali?
I don't believe so.
Okay. Any questions or concerns on that one from council? I think we might have someone here for our second item, the second class liquor license for Cheetah Enterprises LLC, doing business as Sandy's Quick Stop.
Paul, are you going to move them on?
Hi, Cheetah. We can hear you.
Cheetah, did you want to share anything? Oh, looks like just moving over.
Hello, everyone.
Hello, welcome.
Hi, Christy. Nice to see you again.
You too.
Thank you.
Did you have anything you wanted to share today on behalf of?
I'm happy to be on Winooski because I'm moving from Ohio and I'm planning for a new business over here. So I'm so happy over here on Vermont.
That's great. Welcome.
Thank you.
Any questions or concerns from staff on this item? I mean, council.
Yeah, I do have some of the questions.
Oh, sure. You have some questions?
Yeah, we are planning to open as soon as possible. So when we able to open our business? When we gonna start it?
So there's a lot of, we would need a lot more information to know the answer to that. I recommend Heather Carrington is on the screen here with us. If you can see us, she is our economic development officer. Your permit, assuming the council votes, which I imagine they will tonight, your permit will be approved for your second class liquor license. And then if you have all the other state permits you need, you're good to go. But Heather can help walk you through that if you would like.
Thank you.
Cheetah, this is Heather. Please feel free to email me and I will walk you through the process.
Sure, thank you.
You're welcome.
Right. Any questions or concerns from members of the public? If you wish to speak, please use the raise hand button in the participant panel in Zoom or press *9 on your phone. I will give a brief pause to see if anyone wishes to speak. All right. So hearing no concerns, I would entertain a motion from council to approve both the restaurant license for Friends Nepali and the second class liquor license for Cheetah Enterprises.
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Hal, second by Jim. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Motion carries. Thank you. And that is it for the Liquor Control Board. I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Jim, second by Mike. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Motion carries. That meeting is adjourned. So I will now, it is 6:05. I will call to order the regular city council meeting. please once again join us in the Pledge of Allegiance led by Deputy Mayor Hal Colston.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Next is agenda review. Are there any concerns about the order of the agenda this evening? All right. That brings us to public comment. So public comment is a chance for members of the public to speak to any item that is not on today's agenda. If you wish to speak about an item that is on the agenda, please wait until we reach that item this evening. If there is any public comment, I'll again remind you to use the raise hand feature in Zoom or press *9 on your phone, and then to indicate that you wish to speak. All right, we can move on to our consent agenda. We have 3 items for approval. We have our council minutes from July 6th. We have May and June subsequent to payout warrants, account payable warrants July 21 to 30, payroll warrants June 28 to July 11 and July 12 to 25, and Main Street bond documents. Are there any questions or concerns on the consent agenda? Any questions or concerns from the public? Hearing none, I would entertain a motion to approve all 3 consent agenda items.
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Jim, second by Amy. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Motion carries. Thank you. Next is council reports. I'm going to start with you tonight, Jim.
All right. So usually July is a slow month. I feel like a lot's happened. I was fortunate to attend several meetings of the Charter Commission around the charter changes proposed and engaged in some outreach through that process. So there's been, along with the mayor, I've attended several meetings with 23 members of our New American and multilingual communities, discussing issues of inclusion related to our Working Communities Challenge Grant and all resident voting. We've heard some pretty strong support thus far for the concept of expanding the multilingual liaison role in the city, similar to what the school has for homeschool liaisons. And I think there is some general support for allowing voting regardless of citizenship status, but I know we'll discuss that more later, so I'll leave that for the report provided by our Charter Commission. I've also continued to participate in Working Communities Challenge Grant meetings as we gather additional input and feedback. In addition to the above meetings with some of our New American neighbors, our Equity Dialogue group reconvened to review those recommendations they made a year ago, and I've also been working with Deke at the Winooski Housing Authority to distribute a survey and with help from our Charter Commission member, Sam Myers, and how to get this survey out to the Winooski Housing Authority senior living facilities to gauge their needs around economic and social inclusion. So a lot of kind of engagement activities taking into place in the last month on some of these issues. I was also excited to attend the first meeting of the Housing Commission last week since the shutdown for the pandemic. Really appreciative of our commission members coming back for that discussion, where they took up some of the issues that were raised by council in our July meeting and proposed steps that staff had made to address those concerns. I know we'll also have a discussion on this later, but just super appreciative of Heather for all of her work in getting those proposals to the commission and the commissioners for taking up this mantle. It does seem like it's an issue worth keeping an eye on in our city, so I'll leave the rest for that later report. And I think that covers it. Thanks.
Thank you, Jim. Mike, council reports.
Sure. This will be short and sweet. I don't know if everyone's been driving by the pool, but the big slide has been erected and it's causing quite the stir in the city of Winooski. From my understanding, I've heard from several residents their excitement. The excitement's going to be brewing over our winter. So hopefully next summer we have a huge grand opening of our pool. There were some pictures on Facebook from a neighbor that posted them. So if you get a chance, I think it's on I Grew Up in Winooski site on Facebook, or take a drive or walk by the Winooski pool. It's coming around, and it's looking exciting. That's all I have.
Thanks, Mike. Amy?
Thank you. I've got 2 updates tonight. The first is that Downtown Winooski had a meeting last week, and the group is in the process of recruiting new board members. And I also just want to give a shout out to the executive director, Meredith, who I think is doing a really tremendous job during this time, lifting up other businesses and, constantly sharing stuff on social media to help the Winooski business community. I think she's doing a really great job during a really stressful time. So wanted to give her a shout out. Also last week, the Safe, Healthy, Connected People Commission convened. This was the first meeting that we've had since March because of the pandemic. And this meeting was specifically about the Winooski Police Department. Chief Hebert did a fantastic job going over a presentation. And the reason why it focused on the police department was following the death of George Floyd, the chief, the mayor, a lot of us on council, we received a lot of questions from the community, just kind of trying to understand things about our local police department. So we felt like there was a unique opportunity to kind of educate on what the Winooski PD does and does not do. And more importantly, hear what sort of questions the community had on their mind. So it was a really great meeting. I think it was really eye-opening for me to learn more about our police department, and was just a very engaged conversation with the members from public that we did have present. So if anyone's interested in seeing the chief's presentation, they can visit the Winooski website, so winooskivt.gov, and go over to the boards and commissions section, and it will be on the Safe, Healthy, Connected People. And that's all I have. Thank you.
Thanks, Amy. Hal?
I had a brief conversation with Mike O'Brien, who serves on the Regional Planning Commission, and we were talking about their interest in pursuing equity work, and I suggested that he contact Heather Carrington, who is working with the Working Community Challenge grant process, to see how they might be involved in some fashion with that process to pursue equity and having their organization go through a process as well. That's it.
I will share, in addition to some of the meetings that Jim mentioned, doing outreach for Charter Change and Working Communities Challenge, also joined a meeting with the a staff meeting with the U.S. Committee on Refugees and Immigration to get some feedback there. Again, we'll hear more later, and in next month's meeting, I think we'll have an update on that grant process. Had our Finance Commission meeting and are setting them up at their next meeting to help give us feedback on our budget process. If we are involving the council at the right time, if what we're putting forward is the best way to get information out to the community. Planning Commission also met to talk about their moving forward with their work on form-based code and regulations changes, next steps after our the parking waiver that we did not move forward at our last call. No like updates to share there, just sort of a continuation of that work. We also continue to have meetings with the Department of Health throughout the week. Though we haven't had a new case connected to the Winooski outbreak in 3 weeks almost. So things are going well there. And we'll share that on Thursday. I am meeting with a group of high school students virtually who want to engage with the city on what we are doing to pursue more equity in Winooski, and hear what we're doing, and then see how they can participate as well. I'll primarily be sharing some of the work that we highlighted in the resolution we passed a meeting or so ago. Also talking about the goals of the Working Communities Challenge Grant. Members of council or staff, if there's anything specifically that you want to make sure that I highlight, please feel free to email me directly. I also reached out to the Commissioner of Housing and Community Development for the state of Vermont regarding the discussion we had about our concerns about housing data, eviction data, et cetera. And I'm hoping to hear back. He was going to get back to me on how we could potentially access data on the rent stabilization and mortgage assistance programs that the state is running. However, they're tracking that so that we can have an idea of how that's being utilized, as that informs our thought processes. And I also raised the idea that we were interested in any glimpse into what evictions look like. He didn't know offhand what data was available there, but hopefully we will hear more. With that, I will pass it to Jesse Baker for our city update.
Great, thank you very much. I have a number of updates tonight, so bear with me for a few minutes. As the mayor just said, want to start with the COVID outbreak. Things are looking very good. We currently have 117 cases associated with that outbreak, which is just one since our last council meeting in the beginning of July. And that one case was not a Winooski resident, it was in another community. So the statistics pretty much remain the same. 60% of people in that outbreak were asymptomatic, 65% were adults. There is pop-up testing tomorrow at the OCC from 9 to 3 for whomever would like to be tested in our community. We've had over 4,500 people, neighbors from across Brandon County, tested at our pop-ups over the last couple of weeks. We are looking in partnership, or VDH is looking in partnership with us, I should say, to discontinue those pop-ups in Winooski and move to a more sustainable testing option through perhaps some of the pharmacies locally or through some of the healthcare providers. So we hope to learn more about that in the next couple of weeks. And we are, some staff and the mayor are having a process improvement conversation with VDH on Thursday morning to talk about lessons learned as a result of our outbreak, being the first community spread outbreak in the state. I think we're all eager to kind of codify some of what we've learned, hopefully apply those lessons learned not only to other communities that may experience outbreaks over the next couple of months, but also different parts of state government and how they best serve all Vermonters. And finally, about the outbreak, I just want to put out there that talking with partners across city government and across the city, I think we are in a really strong position going into the next phase of the outbreak, in that our community members have come together, have stopped this outbreak incredibly quickly, really in the grand scheme of things, and did that by individual decision-making to protect themselves, protect their families, protect each other, protect all of us. So I think we're really well prepared and well situated going into the fall and winter. So thank you to all who have made individual choices to keep themselves and others healthy. So moving on from that, as you all probably know, next Tuesday is primary day in Vermont. We have been inundated with absentee ballot requests, which is fantastic because, again, it means that people are thinking about their health and safety and their neighbors' health and safety. So far we have had 1,459 absentee ballots requested and sent out. So they have submitted their requests, we have sent them out. As of this morning, 518 had been returned. So that's quite a response, but we're expecting obviously a lot more over the next week. The last day we will mail them out is Friday, although we are highly recommending that if folks have not requested them yet, they do it as soon as possible and they put them back in the mail as soon as possible. People can also bring their absentee ballots to City Hall between 9 and 3, Monday through Friday. They can leave them 24 hours a day in the drop box downstairs at City Hall if they don't want to mail them. They want to make sure they get into this building. They can also drop them off at the polling place on Tuesday. So you can just go in and hand them to the election workers. And then just as a reminder, in Winooski, we do allow day before voting. So they can also come into City Hall next Monday between 9 and 3 and vote. So lots of options to vote and socially distance at the same time. We, of course, will also be running in-person elections on August 11th from 7 to 7. Masks will be required. We are going to limit the number of people actually in the senior center. So we request that if you are coming to vote in person, that you are prepared to wait outside. We will have some tents set up and doing voter screening outside before people are let in to vote. So exciting democracy in action next Tuesday. And every day here at City Hall, if you would like to come and watch Angel and Janet and Carol process absentee ballots. It's quite a system they've got going on. Great discussion on Front Porch Forum this weekend about tax bills, and thank you to the residents who pose those again. We have tried to push out, again, information about that. So just as a reminder to all of our neighbors, this year we are delaying sending out tax bills to August 7th, so they'll go out by the end of the week this week. That was due to the delay in the state tax filing to July 15th. We did not receive all of the homestead declarations until the beginning of, or the end of last week. So if we had sent out bills earlier, we would have had a lot of confusion and people getting bills and potentially overpaying that we were trying to avoid. So they'll go out the end of this week, and then they will be due September 8th, which is the day after Labor Day. I want to share with you that many of you probably know Sergeant Dave Solomon. He is his family has been in Winooski for a while. He's one of our police sergeants. He was our school resource officer for several years before Jason Zeiter took over. He will be retiring at the end of this week. He's had a 20-year career in law enforcement, both here and in South Burlington. Before becoming a police officer, he has a bachelor's of arts in education and was a teacher for several years. And he really transformed the school resources officer position. We are really proud to have had him on the force and wish him well in his retirement, and are also pleased to say he will not be going very far, because at the end of the month, he will be starting as one of our code enforcement officers on a part-time basis or a 30-hour week basis. So we are excited about that. Chief Audie and I want to send out sincere thanks to Nate DeJess and EIV Consulting. They are the current owners of 223 East Allen Street and are about to demolish that building for the affordable housing, integrated affordable housing project that's going up. Over last week and this weekend, Nate donated the building to our fire department and allowed for multiple days of practical hands-on training in that building, which is just hugely meaningful to our staff to be able to really get into a physical structure and practice laddering and ventilation and learning about building construction and whatnot. So on Saturday, we had firefighters from Winooski and St. Mike's on site. About 20 firefighters conducted 8 hours of training each, so 160 hours of combined training in that facility just on one day. So Nate, huge thanks to Nate for that real world training that leads to much better health outcome or safety outcomes for all of us over time. We are continuing to work with Hall Keene Management as a result of their water break a number of weeks ago. The majority of the residents there are back in their homes. However, it's still going to be about another 4 to 5 weeks until the structure is fully repaired and occupied. Very excited to announce that Heather has once again succeeded in writing excellent grants. And so we were awarded a $646,000, almost $647,000 sales tax reallocation award for our Lot 7D project. I think you've heard her talk about it before when you approved it, but basically when you do public-private developments and the private development portion is paying sales tax on construction materials. The state allocates some of those receipts back to the community to improve the development. So $650,000 that will offset the $9.7 million bond we took out for that project. So well done, Heather, and thanks to the state for that program. We are, just a heads up for future conversations, we are anticipating kicking off our citywide parking study in late August in partnership with CCRPC, and I'm very excited about that and more to come. We want to give a quick thanks to the Winooski Gardening Group, or formerly Operation Bloom, for all of their very hard work and many, many volunteer hours to maintain some of the parks and green spaces in the city. It's really blossoming out there, and they've made a huge difference in beautifying our city this summer. So thanks to them. Two quick community services reminders. The Senior Center's More Than a Meal program and Al Fresco Cafe meals to seniors are continuing to be thriving. We do still have capacity. So if we have any neighbors out there who are interested in participating in those senior meals, they can call 655-6425, again, 655-6425, or visit our website. And then last thing is we are adding a third day of weekly curbside pickup at our library, starting in August with all of our staff back. So if folks are interested, need new reading materials, etc., go to email Winooski Library at winooskivt.gov, or you can call the library directly and leave a message. And on a final note, do want to just acknowledge that officially as of today, we have all of our staff back from furlough and are very excited to be fully staffed again and welcoming back our team members. So that's all I had. Thanks very much for your patience.
Thank you. This brings us to item 8. Public hearing has been noticed for the consideration of Vermont Community Development Program Implementation Grant. Heather, do you want to say a few words before I open it to public?
Sure thing. Yeah. So in order to apply for a Vermont Community Development Program, it's required that we have a public hearing so we can hear from our community about whether or not they support the project and applying for the funds. And we are considering applying for funds in support of the Winooski Falls East project, which is, just as a reminder, we've talked about it several times here before, but that is on the lot between CCV and River Run at 17 Abenaki Way. And what's proposed there is a municipal parking garage with above it in the air rights, 125 room hotel and a 36,000 square foot net zero office building for VEIC's headquarters. So overall, the project will bring in over 200 jobs to the community, both high paying jobs and entry level jobs. So it's a broad spectrum. It'll also increase foot traffic moving all the way down Winooski Falls Way. So we're pretty excited about the vibrancy this is going to add. And what we're applying for is $500,000, again, in support of the municipal infrastructure. So primarily buying down the debt on the municipal garage.
Thank you, Heather. At this time, I'd like to open the public hearing. And as a reminder, if you are a member of the public and would like to make comment, please use the raise hand feature in Zoom or press *9 on your phone, and then we will acknowledge you for comments. All right, seeing no public comment, I will now close the public hearing and we will move on to our item 9A, approval of a resolution to apply for the Vermont Community Development Program Implementation Grant. Heather already sort of introed this. Are there any questions from council? All right. Hearing no concerns or comments, I would entertain a motion to approve the resolution to apply for the VDCP implementation grant.
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Mike, second by Hal. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Motion carries. Thank you. We will move on to item B, discussion update for VT CBD Labs at 133 Elm Street. Jesse, did you want to intro this?
Sure, I can intro this. So at your last council meeting, we had this on as an agenda item as well. There were a number of questions posed by members of the community as well as the council. VT or Vermont CBD Labs was not able to join us that evening, but we made a request that they join us tonight and shared with them the questions that you all answered and the residents answered. Additionally, there were some questions about the zoning approval for this project. So what is before you tonight is the email exchange we have had with Vermont CBD Labs. I do not believe there is anybody here tonight from that organization, but if there's anyone in the attendees room who is here tonight from that organization, please raise your hand or put a comment in the chat box. And then also Eric has put together a memo for you about the zoning questions that arose, as well as some next steps around enforcement that we are discussing with partners. So if it pleases you all, I'd like to turn it over to Eric to share with the community and with you what he has included in his memo.
I think that'd be great. Thanks.
Thank you all very much. So as Jesse mentioned, included with your agenda was a memo from me outlining the change of use from the zoning perspective. The biggest part with that is that the use that's there is a permitted use by right in the zoning district. Therefore, the approval process for that change of use happens administratively. With all of our administrative approvals, the property just gets posted for the 15-day appeal period. There's no formal notification to any of the adjacent property owners when we do administrative approvals. The only time the adjacent property owners would be notified is if there's a formal public hearing that will be happening due to either a conditional use or a waiver request or something of that nature that would go before the Development Review Board. So because the uses are allowed by right, it followed the administrative approval process. The other part that we've been tracking, and I've been doing a lot of research on this lately that's outlined in the memo, is there's been some I'll say misunderstanding, quite frankly, on my behalf, maybe more than anyone's, on how this use is technically designated, because it has an agricultural designation as part of the Governor Scott's executive orders. So it's been allowed to operate because hemp is considered an agricultural commodity. Therefore, they have been exempt from the Stay Home, Stay Safe order based on the executive order of the governor. With that in mind, there's also this separate piece, which is the agricultural exemption, which is given through the Agency of Agriculture based on the required agricultural practices and kind of how the use itself is regulated through the Agency of Ag. As I understand it, the use does not carry that agricultural exemption. And since it doesn't have the agricultural exemption, the city can enforce our land use regulations against this use as for violating our performance standards. In the performance standards in section 4.13, it specifically states that agriculture and forestry uses are exempt from those standards. But since this doesn't carry that agricultural exemption, that section can be enforced. So I need to confirm that it does not have the agricultural exemption before moving forward with that process. But that is one of the things that I'll be looking into moving forward. Additionally, I reached out to the Agency of Agriculture about whether or not there's any air quality permitting that's required with the agriculture use. And as far as I'm aware, or as far as I've been told, again, some follow-up is needed on this as well. They are not required to get any type of air quality permitting as part of the operation. With that said, the Department of Environmental Conservation's Air Quality Division has received reports as well, and they've also received complaints. So they are doing investigations from their end as well. One of the big challenges that we have with any of the enforcement on this is kind of what the metrics are that we're measuring against. So since it's a potential odor issue, we don't have any standards to kind of identify the frequency or the intensity or the consistency of the odor to really be able to say, yes, you're in violation of a specific rule. So one of the keys here is that we just make sure that we have adequate documentation of the complaints that have come in so that we can start building the case to cite the operator. With all of that said, some of the information that I've seen from the use, it looks like they're expecting to be finished with all their drying by the end of August. So it may be that any enforcement action that we would take from a zoning perspective needs to be, the first step is to issue a notice of violation, which is sent via certified mail. Once that gets sent, the recipient of it has 7 days to correct the problem or to start correcting the problem before we can start enforcing against it. So it's possible that the way this all lines up, they may be done with their operation before any enforcement happens, but we are still going to look into what we need to do to pursue that once we have finalization of all these kind of outstanding pieces and get full confirmation that the use either does or does not have the agricultural exemption and that we can proceed forward. So I'll pause with that and see if I can answer any questions if you have any.
So if I could just add a sentence to that, what would be helpful to Eric's last point about quantifying the impact on our community is if you all are the counselors are receiving calls or emails complaining about this, it would be helpful if you could share those with us. Additionally, if you could ask folks to use the minimum housing complaint form that's on our website to submit concerns, that would be very useful. That is also linked in this agenda item as well. Thanks, Eric, for the overview.
I have a question. I know we invited them to this council meeting. Has there been any correspondence between the CDB labs and the city on some of the things that we talked about at our last meeting?
So yes, in your agenda packet is the extent of what we have. So we, I think the link's called like email correspondence or whatnot. That is the full list of correspondence between the mayor, myself, Heather, and the business, sharing those questions, asking for them to participate today. We have not received any response to that request since our last meeting.
Amy?
I guess I'm just curious what happens after the 7-day period. You know, you said that they have 7 days to correct the action, and what happens if there is not an improvement?
Yeah, so the way the regulations are laid out is, in essence, we would begin fining them. And there is a specific amount that's outlined in state statute for the maximum amount that we can fine them. I believe it's $200 per violation, and each day that they do not correct it is considered a separate violation. So each day we would levy that same fine against them until something was done.
Any other questions from council?
Yeah, I quickly read these, but I'm just reading them again. And there has, after the questions that the mayor and the city have asked, there hasn't been a response from them. So I'm wondering if city sends them another questionnaire about the questions you asked to see if we can get a response from them, because there is really no response on the correspondence that you guys sent out. Is there what's the next move? To try it again, call them, or send someone down there?
So all yes to all of 3 of those. So we certainly will be in touch with them both from a compliance perspective in person, from a business support perspective, and also sharing with them this conversation tonight and Eric's memo about enforcement actions. We don't want that's $200 a day per fine. That adds up very quickly, and we do not want them to be surprised by that. We would much rather them take this seriously, hear our neighbors, hear the concerns, and work proactively to address it, so we can keep a good business with good jobs in our city, but also have people enjoy their properties. So yes, Mike, on all fronts, we will be reaching out to them.
Okay. I think another response or a question would be just being neighborly to the residents. Commercial and Winooski, commercial landscape and residential landscape have to coexist together. So I think just being kind of simple worded, saying, ask them to be neighborly to the people around them so they can enjoy some of the nice weather we're having this summer.
Any other questions?
Mayor, if I may, may just encourage counselors, as we are with staff, of just, we're in a process at this point, and it's not going to be fast enough for anyone who's got an issue with it. It's just encouraging people to, and then it's a big ask, right? To be patient through the process. There's only so fast that we can go now that we're in this process, and that is collecting documentation and not misstepping from a staff perspective or the city's perspective of if it goes down the road of enforcement. And that's tough when the neighbors are calling, and they're tough phone calls. So, and I'm sure they're tough for counselors. I know you're getting those. Just encouraging people that we're working on their behalf as diligently as we can, and pulling resources with our partners, with the state, and that sort of thing. So,
thank you for that reminder.
Can I respond to that?
It would never be fast enough, but we are working on something.
Yeah, can I respond to that, Mayor?
Sure.
John, that's a good point. And I think that's spot on what you just said. And I think if we can relay that to the neighbors, it's a learning curve to new business. And I think the learning curve, so maybe we can learn both city neighbors and the business so it doesn't happen again, or we can try to rectify it for next summer. I think that's spot on, John.
I do want to share, we received one public comment via our form. A neighbor just wanting to make it known that the offensive odor was reaching them on West Canal Street. There are several people who have been reaching out to me about this issue that I have been in repeated contact with, shared Eric's memo ahead of this call. And I certainly heard some appreciation that we are taking steps, despite the continued frustration of the experience. Are there any members of the public on the call right now who wish to ask questions or share concerns on this topic? Again, raise your hand in Zoom or press *9 on your phone.
We'll start with Mr. John Royer.
Hi, yes, it's John and Tina Royer here. We're on West.
Hi, John.
Hi. Thanks.
I just read your comment.
Yes, you did. Yes, thanks. I just really wanted to make it clear that this went well beyond the area of Elm Street and West Street and Hickok Street and River Street. We get this offensive odor almost daily down on West Canal Street. And at times we can't be outside when that's happening, nor can we open our windows.
Thank you, John. I live on West Spring Street and I also smell it frequently. So
everybody's
definitely, yeah.
Okay, good.
It's a broad area.
Okay. The other thing was that they're talking about being finished at the end of August. They're still drying last year's crop. And I would be questioning the quality of what they're doing. If this hemp from last year is still wet, it's probably moldy, and maybe that's why there's such a stench. But they'll be starting up again in October with this year's crop.
That is what they have shared, yes.
So I'm just glad to hear that we're not going to drop it because it's a slow process, and the fact that they're almost done, because it sounds as though we might only get a 1 month reprieve from this drying process.
Nice. Yes, we will continue. Staff will continue to pursue this. And feel free to submit a complaint via the minimum housing complaint form to help us with documentation.
Okay, we'll do that. And I'm wondering if maybe someone on the council could reach out to an expert on the hemp drying process if you haven't already, because I am curious to know how they have been storing this hemp wet from last fall to now, and how that hemp would even be a viable product.
Thank you. I don't believe we are in the position of regulating how they process their products, and that's something that we can raise to the state.
It would just be interesting to know if a regular crop, maybe it's not going to smell as bad if they're doing some fresh product. I
see what you're getting at. Yes. Yeah, and I think that's the real concern here. Not the real concern. That is a big part of the concern, is what does the future look like? Is this really an issue that's going to go away? How can we make sure that this isn't a problem again next summer or for an extended amount of time?
Okay.
Okay.
Thanks. We appreciate you addressing it.
Thank you. I think we have I see another hand raised.
That's Steve. Go ahead, Steve.
Good evening. How are you? It's Steve and Joanne Plosier. We live here at 75 Elm Street. We were involved in last month's meeting.
Welcome back.
First, my first concern is, I guess you've notified the business of neighboring people's concerns, and they're not responding to one of these meetings and sharing with us at least their process and explaining it to us. Dealing in several communities and DRBs, that's one of the big things that really helps a startup business. My second, I've got a number of questions here, so stop me if you want me to shut up. Is I believe that site is an Act 250 site down there, and they would have required an Act 250 permit, possibly on top of what was already there. Granted, the city's zoning allows for a change of use through an administrative decision, but if it's an Act 250 site, the administrative change would have been based on a decision from the Act 250 board and the Environmental Commission, which if it does have the Act 250, which I believe it does, they would have been required to share or do the investigation on odors emitted, trucks, deliveries, etc., throughout the site. I mean, it is a minor. I do understand what a minor and a major is in the permitting process, but it just seems like the Act 250 would have been overriding, or would have been your backup, that if Act 250 was okay with it, you were okay with it afterwards. Another concern I have is if Winooski had a minor zoning change of use and they could administratively do it. This business is at the end of a residential route. A lot of kids, a lot of housing on private streets. A lot of trucks come down here constantly. I know I've been here for 30-something years. And I don't know if the board looks into that as businesses come into that building. You know, how many trucks are they getting a day? What are the weight of those trucks? I mean, the road on Elm Street, West Street, and I'm not sure the other one up there, they're bowing and crowning wickedly from the weight of the trucks. I don't know what these hemp trucks weigh. I've seen them come in and I've seen the garbage go out, but I haven't seen anything leave that site. The memo from Eric, thank you for this extensive memo. You did a great job on it. It helped me understand your zoning process and why I wasn't notified. And thank you for that. But my concern is, it says, you know, the governor gave them a reprieve on the COVID-19 and getting their product going and so on. But in the last meeting, the reason they were delayed was because of building build out. Wasn't due to COVID. They got lucky and COVID helped them go longer. So I have some concerns on their communication with why they started so late. And then as the earlier gentleman mentioned, we're giving them till the end of August, but they're going to start right back up in October. And what is that going to bring? Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Eric, I don't know if you can speak to his questions about Act 250 or.
So I don't believe this change of use went through the Act 250 permitting process. The property itself is large enough to qualify for an Act 250 permit. But I don't know, because the building already existed and they were just changing the use. I don't know. I don't think it went through the Environmental Commission for an Act 250 permit. Even if it did, however, the state's process and the city's process run independently. So we can't hold up our process for the state, and vice versa. The state can't hold up their process for us. So we have to review the regulations based off of, or we have to review the application based off of our regulations. They would get a local permit from us, but if they also did need an Act 250 permit, they would need to get the state's permit as well in order to start their operations. So my guess is that they did not have to go through Act 250 on this because it was just a change of use. But I can look into that as well.
Thank you, Eric. Are there any other comments or questions?
Yeah, you better get. I don't want this one. Yeah. Sorry.
Go ahead if you have another comment, Steve.
Well, I see nobody else coming in on this meeting, so I wish some more Winooski people would be involved in this. More so for the child's and kids' safety around this place. I would like to see and get something from Winooski on this truck route and vehicles, weight limits, time trucks can come and go down this road. I know there was extensive issues with this back in the mid-90s, and there were some rules put on the books. So, I mean, it's not just basically about the COVID plant. It's a business. I'm glad they're down there. I'm glad they're putting jobs together. the CBD lab. You know, CBD is a big upcoming thing. There's a lot of unknowns about it. When they made hemp planting going, everybody went for it, and a lot of people lost their shirts on it. And I hope these guys don't, and they can rectify this problem with a small amount of the emissions they're emitting and run a good business down there and create a bunch of jobs. I'm all for it. But as a local on this street, one of my bigger concerns is one of these rigs coming down here, day, nights, whenever. Also, the structurability of the streets in Winooski, when I think that business was supposed to help be responsible for some of these roads as they decay. Thank you.
Thanks, Steve. I'm sure we could share out at some point what the rules are around that, but I do want to point out that the business that preceded this for years down there shipped power equipment. There was already a lot of truck traffic, so that's not brand new to this business. But we can share more information on that. Also, as I mentioned, to your point, there maybe are not a lot of people at this meeting, but I am hearing from quite a few residents privately. Let us move on to our next item, C, for discussion. Charter Commission recommendations, all resident voting, administrative changes, and self-governance rights. Jesse, do you want to introduce this?
So I would like, Paul, can you move over Liz? Here she comes.
Excellent.
And Sam Myers, Paul, and Bob DePalma, and Alex Yin. Is that? I think those are, and Doug Johnson as well, Paul. So these are members of your charter commission who are here tonight with a recommendation, as well as Bob DePalma, who is the city's attorney, who's drafted the language that's before you for discussion tonight. And just by way of introduction, the commission's done great work, very impressive group of people who spent a lot of time on this. We do have a time constraint in that if this is something you want to put on the actual November ballot, the language needs to be finalized by August 24th. So I think Liz was going to.
Sure.
Thank you.
Hi.
Welcome.
Thanks so much. Can you see me?
We can hear you. Your video is not
on. Well, I'm not sure why.
Go ahead, Liz. You should be all set.
I see you now.
Okay.
Welcome.
Hi. Yeah, so I'm Liz Edsel. I'm the chair of the Charter Commission, and I put together a report of our work to date, and want to just note a couple of words of appreciation for the rest of the members of the Charter Commission. We've had 15 meetings since we formed last November, and have done a lot of really productive collaborative work in preparing a fact sheet on how all resident voting could work. We dug in on a couple of key topics, like how to use inclusive language, on whether or not to be specific about whether or not folks should have legal documentation as, with immigrant documentation. And we have been in an outreach phase that really kicked off on town meeting day, where one member and I spent much of the day flyering just with the fact sheet, getting that info out there and engaging in conversations. Obviously, the onset of COVID-19 put our outreach on hold for a while. We reconvened in May and have since been really trying to prioritize outreach to key stakeholders from the New American community and many other parts of the city. So we have done a lot of work, and there's a lot of work still happening. So, just in the last few days since I filed this report, a dozen more contact reports have been submitted. So there are now over 40 submissions, and some of those were from group meetings with 10 plus participants. So at this point, we wanted to move the question to the city council with this report of if you're going to put it on the November ballot, this is the window of time. And based on the work that we've done so far, it's my feeling that that would be what I would recommend. I'm also happy to hear any questions, or if the council wants us to continue doing more work, we will continue doing more work. So unless, I don't know if Hal or Jim or other members of the commission have anything to add, but I would welcome any questions.
Thanks, Liz. I do want to say that I was impressed by how rapidly you all picked it back up after reconvening from the pandemic break. I appreciate the work that's been going in. Just before we dig into questions, this item is on tonight for discussion. As Jesse mentioned, if it is something that we want to move forward with for the November ballot, we would need to convene another meeting before August 24th to approve ballot language. I think the goal tonight is to ask any questions we have, and then either decide that we want to do like take a vote at another meeting to move forward towards November, or send it back to the Charter Commission for more work there. So I just want to set the table of like, what are we doing right now? And so with that, would like to turn it back to any member of the commission. If you want to share anything, then we can move to questions from council. Hal.
Oh, hi. It's a question for Liz. Given that you just received another 12 contact reports, how many more might you envision in the next several weeks or month in terms of more input?
It's a really good question. I think it depends on the degree to which the multilingual liaisons who have been assisting with the effort over the last few weeks are able to continue that work. I think there's always more people you can talk to, but I think that this November's election, with the likelihood that it'll be the case that every voter will be mailed a ballot, I think has a uniquely kind of beneficial opportunity for, one, just most people are paying attention to elections, and this is an important conversation for our city. And then two, this is kind of, for all of the rest of the charter changes, wonky stuff that people will probably have questions on. And I think it'd be easier for voters to review their ballots, look for more information online, have ongoing public hearings. As much as I would like to say, yeah, we're going to get a contact report from, 100% of Winooski residents, I don't think that's the goal or even necessary. I think this is an ongoing conversation. So I don't know if anybody else has thoughts. So right now we have, official reports from at least 50 conversations with many of our kind of key stakeholders, which we would, consider anyone who would be potentially eligible to vote. I will say it's not without questions. So there's still the outstanding question of how one's citizenship application process would be impacted. And I would encourage the lawyer or with USCRI to do a little bit more work on that. But frankly, this is just opening a door, and it will be up to people to determine whether or not they want to choose to register and vote. I'm not sure that we'll ever have clarity until somebody tests it in a court of law. And so then it's up to the individual to decide. And there are residents who are not currently citizens who could vote because they might not be on a path to becoming a U.S. citizen, but they are a resident here. So that's just a couple of different thoughts on timing and on outreach.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I would add to that. So thanks to Jim for a lot of coordination. Jim and I already were able to meet with, through our school liaisons, a group of members of the Nepali community, members of the Somali community. Next week, I'll be meeting with a group of Congolese folks and another group.
Arabic speaking community.
Arabic speaking community. Thank you, Jim. which is great. This is a stakeholder group that when the previous council discussed this topic, we wanted to engage more deeply. And I think we are seeing a lot of feedback there. I will say there are sort of two key takeaways that I've heard from these folks so far. One is they're generally supportive of this idea. However, that question about how does voting in a local election impact a question on the citizenship application that asks if you've ever voted in a state or federal election, how do we make sure that either ideally, we want to know if this would have a negative impact on that. If we can't answer that, then we need to be able to tell people that at the point of registration. I think that's something for us to reach out to. I'm going to reach out to USCRI and potentially get their advice. Is there like a lawyer or someone that we need to speak to about that? But that is a really critical question for these folks. The other thing that's been surfaced is that a lot of already naturalized citizens are not voting because they already don't receive the information. They're not finding out when there's a vote, who the candidates are, what the issues are. I think this is a problem throughout our community, not just with new Americans, but I think the language barrier is an added barrier there. So what I'm sort of summarizing is that we've got this one outstanding question to answer that's important to this group. And also it's really important to them that we actually do more outreach and information sharing. That's sort of the thing that they want the most, that I have heard. Amy?
Liz, excuse me, I wanted to thank you and the Charter Commission for all of the work that you've put in so far. I found your report to be extremely thorough, and it was helpful just to kind of understand what outreach has been done so far. For me, I really feel like now is not the right time to put this on the ballot, and I would not be supportive of it. And it's nothing to do with the question itself or the work that you all have done, but I just feel like we have not done enough outreach yet. We have not had enough conversations with the public about this. It is a really controversial issue for our community, and we haven't even had a public hearing about this yet. So, for me to think about putting something on the ballot coming up by August 24th for an issue that is that controversial, that we haven't even had a public hearing on, I just have some fundamental problems with that. And I went back and I looked at the video from last year's city council meeting from around this time. And I thought it was really interesting to watch that because there were, first of all, about 20 or 30 people in the audience just for that one particular conversation. And if you look at the audience here tonight, maybe we have a few members of the public, but most folks who are on this call are commission members. So that tells me that the community is just not paying attention to this topic enough, or that we're not communicating it well enough to them and letting them know avenues that they can engage in it. Some of the things that people had said last year, they asked, are we going to be going door to door? How are we going to be telling people about this change? And we sort of reassured them, oh, don't worry, there'll be plenty of opportunities to have conversations. Yes, we will go door to door. We'll consider that. Obviously, we can't do that right now during COVID. That would be a major health problem. But it just feels like the avenues that we are putting out there for people to participate in, we're not getting enough traction. And it's not just you all. I mean, we had a public hearing tonight and no one was in attendance for it. We've had city council meetings all summer where we have hearings and there's no members of the public. And although that's not super rare, I just think that missing that in-person interaction is really limiting the amount of people that we're able to hear from. So I think that for me, I would like to delay putting this on the November ballot, potentially consider it in March or another time after we've been able to do more outreach to the community, hear more voices, and really lift up the number of touches that have happened.
Thanks, Amy. Jim.
So I've been thinking about where we've come on this issue. I mean, this issue has been in discussion in our community for years. This started before most of us were on council, and two of us were just recently on council. And the issue was that we hadn't reached out at that time, was that this wasn't ready because we hadn't heard from those most impacted. And I think this Charter Commission has done an amazing job to figure out how to connect with those people and what they needed to communicate. And lots of thought went into language and translation and ways to connect with community members at grocery stores and in their places where they are, and then also using the community networks we have to engage with that community. So I think the Charter Commission took that particular charge and went with it. I think that there is some value to City Council hearing more voices, but we've heard a lot of voices at this point. We've had public meetings in person where people have come to voice both their support and their displeasure with this action. We've heard the same several voices on Front Porch Forum that oppose this action, and others on Front Porch Forum who do. We've had many controversial issues with very little public participation before a pandemic. I don't see this issue as a question of whether we need more time for people to tell us whether it should be on the ballot. It seems like this is a time to get as many people to tell us through the ballot whether this is what they want. And we have a unique opportunity. This is going to be the highest participation election probably in a long time, with a format that would make it much easier to take the time and do the research on who you're voting for and what you're voting for, because everything's going to be on paper. There will not be another opportunity like this for 4 years. And I would worry about a charter change that's done at a town meeting day when we have much lower voter turnout than we will have in a November election. So I feel like we've discussed this community issue for years. We slowed this down. We tasked an independent group to take the time that they needed. They did the best that they could in challenging times. I mean, 15 meetings in 8 months is more than the council has done. And that's during a pandemic with a hiatus. I think they've logged over 60 interactions on this topic in 3 weeks. We have a survey out to 150 senior living facility residents. We have these 2 new meetings with at least 20 people coming up. I think that we have a lot of time between now and November to go out and do outreach on this issue. And I think we are going to have to get creative, because I don't think we can put it to wait. I think we've gotten a strong endorsement from the Charter Commission. This isn't a question of whether the Charter Commission thinks this is a good idea. This is a pretty strong recommendation, and I don't know why we would ignore it at this time. I do think we're doing well in Winooski to support our residents, and I think we can do better. 10% of our residents and of our neighbors are going to be enfranchised to this change. And I feel like I can't go drop off my kids at school and stand next to 9 other people and say one of you doesn't get to decide who represents you in this government. One of you doesn't get to decide how we are going to spend your tax money, even though you're paying it. And I don't know how we can go through these 3 years of process and then say the time isn't right yet. We have to wait. You have to wait. That's a hard thing for me to feel to say at this point. I think that we've slowed it down. We've had the discussion at the Charter Commission level. I think there's a substantial amount of community engagement that has been already done. I think there's a lot teed up that can really get people educated about what they're going to be voting for. And it's time to just let the people vote. I think we need to ask voters if they want to fix this issue. It's simply not fair. It's not equitable. I want to see that changed. So I really hope that we can at least move this to a discussion of ballot language and have a vote to put this on the ballot in November.
Thanks, Jim. Mike? Sorry.
Yes, I'll echo what Amy says. I think we owe it to our residents to have those public hearings. I think we owe it to the non-citizens and citizens to have their voices heard. And correct me if I'm wrong, don't we have to have 2 public hearings on a change like this? Jesse, is that correct?
Yes, once it's on the ballot. So once you vote to put it on the ballot, then you have to have 2 public hearings to educate folks on it.
Okay. Because at that July 15th meeting or whatever it was last year, there was, I think, 35 people there that they spoke calmly. They spoke educatedly about it. And I think we owe it to all the residents to have this outreach, because we told them that's what we were going to do. And, you know, I've been hearing it from all kinds of people. I've heard it from new Americans that have become citizens, that they just don't understand it. They went through the process. They don't understand why other citizens, non-citizens, can't go through the process. I heard pros and cons for it, but we told the citizens that we'd have the public outreach, and we have failed to do that. You've done a little bit of it, and it's because of the pandemic, but I want to stress the point that we owe it to our residents to get out door to door when we can safely, or even have a public hearing, because some people don't have the Wi-Fi. They're not able to get on Zoom or make a phone call in. I think they'd rather be in person talking about this controversial item, because this is a huge item. This is going to impact our charter, and I think we owe it to the residents to have, even if we have to have a bigger forum than City Hall. I know the senior center is always available. We can use even a bigger forum than that if we had to make sure we're safe and doing our social distancing. But again, I think we owe it to the residents of Winooski.
Thanks, Mike. Hal, you had your hand up as well?
Yes. You know, it was probably over 200 years ago, there was a party in Boston known as the Boston Tea Party. And it was a revolt about taxation without representation. Now, I don't imagine anything even close to that. But I think the time has come that as a council, we need to act with leadership and give our community its opportunity to weigh in on this issue. We've been talking about this for many, many years, and we keep kicking the can down the road. It was over a year ago, council decided to pull back because we realized we needed to have more of a process to engage our community. And then, of course, we're now in this pandemic, which has hampered every form of communication and challenged us. So I think we need to be creative. We're not going back to what America was last year. You know, we're in a serious pandemic, and we're going to have to realize that we have to do things differently. So I want to applaud the Charter Commission for all the work it was allowed to accomplish under these circumstances and under these challenges. But I agree with Liz that there's no better opportunity for us as a community to present this divisive, issue to the voters. And we'll have probably a record number of voters weighing in and hearing their voices finally about this issue. But outreach doesn't stop with this decision that we need to make. It will have to continue. We will have to have hearings. We'll have to have further ways to educate our community. I remember last year we had a city council meeting that I thought was interesting because we had a full chamber of people who came in to a process where we were looking at the various charter commissions and looking at weighing in on the language and approving it. And people were there to vote down this issue because they were misinformed. And my point is, our community still needs to be educated about this process, what it really means. And it's actually our loss as a community when we have such a significant number of voices that can't vote. They pay taxes, their kids are in our school, they own homes, etc., but they can't vote because they're on a path to citizenship, which may take several years, which may take many years. So it's our loss if we don't have their voice in our process and a way to check us on how we deliver our policy and our budgets and all the important matters that make this community a healthy community. So I believe now is the time that we should move forward to plan on putting this on the November ballot, which would put it in place if it goes forward to the legislature, will be on the top of the list of the biennium to be considered and to be processed. I think waiting will just, kick the can down the road even further. And I think the time has come that we need to give our citizens, our voters, a chance to finally weigh in on this issue. We're going to always hear, push and pull. That's the way the topic is. But waiting in this new normal doesn't make any sense, because we have to figure out how to reach people in a different way. And knocking on doors is not going to touch it. It's not going to get it. So waiting for that, I'm not interested. So now's the time.
Thanks, Hal.
Can I just add one more thing, Christine?
Sure.
I think that you're right, Hal, that we do need to find new and different ways to engage people. And that is fundamentally what I'm worried about with putting this on the ballot before we can do that with voters. We have a very engaged member of the public who tonight emailed a comment because he said that he doesn't understand how to get on Zoom. How many other people are like him in the community that maybe want to engage, but they have technological challenges, or they don't know how to use a computer, or they have a language barrier, or whatever it is. I think that if we do look for other avenues, we have to find something that's going to be on par with that in-person interaction, because that's what we promised all those people in the room last summer, and there really hasn't been an opportunity for people to come together yet, like we said there would be. And that just doesn't feel right to me.
I'd like to can I make a comment, Mayor?
Sure, Mike.
Well, I want to answer something that Hal just said. The last meeting with the 35 people there, they were there to speak their opinion on opposition of the charter change. They weren't misinformed. They were there to speak their mind on the charter change. So they weren't misinformed, Hal. So I don't think that's very fair of you to say about the residents that showed up to that meeting.
Well, that wasn't the purpose of the meeting, Mike. That wasn't the purpose of the meeting.
Yeah, but they were there to make
so they were misinformed.
How? They were there to speak their
mind. Well, that wasn't the purpose of the meeting.
Okay, let me cut in on this. Can you both? The point I think that is being made here is we had a bunch of people show up to speak against the charter change at a meeting when we were actually just establishing a commission. So I think you both have a point here that we don't need to dig deeper. What I would like to propose is that we schedule another meeting. We have 3 weeks before we have to vote on this, that August 24th deadline. I would propose that we schedule another meeting later this month to make that decision. And in the meantime, perhaps Charter Commission, we could do more fact sheet distribution at the primaries on Tuesday. And I am available on that day as well to help out. And I think we also could organize separately from the council meeting, and someone stop me if this is a terrible idea, a socially distanced in-person like Q&A, potentially at a park or the senior center gardens or somewhere like that, to try to add more of an in-person option. Jim?
I would fully support that. I think saying that we can't talk about this, we can't make a decision about this until Zoom is not the way that we're meeting is not going to work. So we need to find different ways, and that's on us. I don't think we can put that on someone else to say that we'll wait for community members to propose places where we can meet them where they are, or that we're going to task a commission that's already met so much to try and do more. They've already done a lot. I think now it's council's turn. I think that we've got some models for meeting in person. The school has done a good job of setting up spaces where in-person safe meetings can happen outside. We have nice weather. We have a window of time. And if the concern of my other counselors is that we haven't heard from people, then let's hear from people. And I think we have 3 months of good weather with infrastructure and support and time and momentum and focus on this issue that would be well spent instead of waiting starting again and hearing the same things. And I want to support what Hal said. There were people there who said this is unconstitutional. That's just false. They said this is illegal. That was false too. There was a lot of misinformed statements at that meeting, as well as a misunderstanding of where we were in the process. So I think that we have done some education. I think there's much more to do, but I think the ultimate test of whether this succeeds is going to be whether the majority of Winooski voters vote on it, and we will determine how successful that vote is based on how many people vote. And the legislature will look at that. They will care if 700 people voted for it as opposed to 1,000 people. So I think the most important thing is to get this question in front of as many people. That is in November. And I think it is incumbent on council to make a decision. And then if we decide to put it on the ballot, do the work. So do the outreach and then get this before as many people as possible. And I'm willing to support and coordinate. I'm getting good at logistics on outside safe meetings. So if we want to do that, I'm here. I will work with anyone on novel communications. I'm working with Commissioner Myers on surveys with the Winooski Housing Authority because we can't go meet with seniors. I think there are other options that we can use to try and get this information out there. And I would really encourage us to lean into this one.
So speaking of Commissioner Myers, I see his hand is raised. Paul, can you bring him in?
Can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
All right. Can you see me?
Can't see you though.
Okay, that's okay. So I want to thank City Council for giving me this opportunity to voice my opinion on non-citizen voting. Before I do,
Sam, you got muted.
Can you hear me now?
I can, yeah.
Okay. And I also want to thank Liz for, she's very instrumental taking the lead in this. She put a lot of time into the Charter Commission report and the rest of the commission members. We did a lot of work, and I thank everyone that, partook in this. So I think it's essential that we citizens play an active role in our community and be a voice on local issues. A conversation of non-citizen voting, I think, is long overdue, and I'm honored to be a part of it. We did spend a lot of time examining non-citizen vote. And are we going to get into the Charter Commission language at all during this meeting, or is that going to be the next one? I'm just curious.
I think we do have to talk about it at this meeting. If our next meeting step would be voting yes or no on ballot language, so we will need to dig in here.
Okay, great. So, Jim, I do agree with you. The American people have the right to decide rules and standards for citizenship, and they have done that by law. It's important to remember state sovereignty in the context of the 10th Amendment. Correct me if I'm wrong, Hal, but the federal government leaves it up to the states to decide who gets to vote in municipal elections. So here we are. I think our commission spent a lot of time on the non-citizen voting aspect, and there's some language in there that I disagreed with, and I was one of 5 members to vote down the terminology of all resident voting. They were trying to substitute the word all resident voting from non-citizen voting, and to me, I just feel like it's factually correct to call folks in our community non-citizens that don't have citizenship than to be morally right. So, to decide to stop using the term non-citizen, even though the New York City Council voted to ban the term alien and illegal immigrant, and the term they are now using moving forward is non-citizen. So yes, I was the only member to vote against the term all resident. I feel like it's misleading, especially if we're trying to pass language that may go on a ballot. I don't know what the ballot language is going to be, but I feel like if the term all resident is on there in place of non-citizen, I think that'd be a huge mistake. Moving forward, I am with Amy and Mike on this. I don't think we are ready as a community yet to move forward with this because, we had a 3-month delay due to COVID. Our ongoing, our public outreach was very limited to what we could do. We have a small sample size of direct response to non-citizen voting. So, to be a part of this commission, I was honored. I think it's a great conversation to have. And I just want to know kind of, the councilor's opinion on all resident voting or non-citizen voting.
Thanks, Sam. I know that y'all discussed that terminology as far as the fact sheet and outreach. Is that actually in the language in the charter changes? I'm looking for it.
I believe the charter change. I mean, so if you go back and look at the very first sentence, it states City Council established a charter commission a year ago to examine options to present to the Winooski voters with a charter change that would enable non-citizen residents voting in Winooski municipal elections. So I don't see why on our fact sheet we're changing it to all resident voting when here we are, we're presented with the, trying to figure out if non-citizens should vote or not in municipal elections. So that was kind of like a huge, it was kind of huge for me. And plus, if a non-citizen gets on the voter registration, they're allowed to run for municipal office, whether it's city council or school board. And I just feel any kind of elected office should be reserved for legal citizens. So that's my opinion.
I see. I think so. The question is this language used in the actual charter? And then the second piece would be, what if this goes on the ballot? How are we referring to that item, I suppose? Liz, I think you were raising your hand.
Yeah, and I think one of the key purposes of this measure is to be the inclusive and welcoming community that we always talk about being, and to define a group of people by what they are not, than by what they are, does not feel like it's in keeping with the goal of this whole effort, which is to have our neighbors be a part of this community and have a say in the things that matter deeply in one's day-to-day life. So we intentionally did not use the term non-citizen, even though it was in our commission founding documents, to reflect the goals of equity and inclusion. The language that is drafted in the amendment in 19-202 does not use the term non-citizen, and in fact, to make the charter a more inclusive document, anywhere where being a U.S. citizen was not literally required for whatever the thing was to make sense, we had that word replaced with resident or something else that made sense.
A question for Jesse, maybe, or Bob, I'm not sure. I don't know that even previously, like with the charter as is, that citizenship is required to run for council or school board.
So in the current charter, the qualifications to run for local office are to be a voter in the community. So, and that's defined in state statute as a citizen. So to change, so what the Charter Commission has talked about is to change who would be considered a qualified voter and not change who is able to run for office. That is something that in theory could be discussed, but the commission has not made that changed recommendation at this point.
Thoughts from counselors on this?
I'm all for using inclusive language, and I think that if this were to go to a vote after the fact, I think it would make sense to use that inclusive language. I think that right now the community has been talking about it as essentially like deciding if non-citizens can vote or not. And when I was reading the recommendations, I did find that language proposed to be potentially confusing. So I think for me, I would rather see it listed as non-citizen and reflecting how the commission was originally stood up using that language. That being said, I could be persuaded on that if we did, public outreach to kind of explain this is essentially what would be on the ballot. This is the language. And this is why we changed it.
Hal?
I just want to support the work of the Charter Commission. They put a lot of time and conversation into this issue and voted for it, and I stand by their vote.
Well, you know how I believe this commission, as honored as I was to be a part of it, I do feel like the commission was stacked. So regardless of what was going to happen, we were going to approve it anyway, and maybe one or two votes would have been in opposition of it. I came in with an open mind on this. I learned a lot about citizenship, how difficult it is to get citizenship, and some other things that was very informative. But I feel like at the moment, from my perspective, when I first met with you guys, I wanted to go knock on doors and get the community engaged and involved. Back July 15, 2019, members of the community, they thought they did think that council was going to move forward with non-citizen voting. And they came down in opposition, made their voices heard. And again, this is why I think, maybe we should table it to get more community engagement. I know we've done a good amount, but I think it's just it's a small amount of what we've done compared to what us seven can do if we were to get the community more engaged. And right now, doing Zoom meetings, I mean, my grandmother doesn't have access to Zoom, and she's a voter here in Winooski. Her along with 600, 700, 800 other seniors. So it's great conversation, and like I said, I'm glad to be a part of it. I just wish there was more community engagement, more community involvement.
I see Alex has his hand up.
Yes. I'm going to say that, let's not try to conflate, education and using inclusive excellence in terms of our language. I mean, I'm going to remind folks that if the United States of America, as the government, is for the people, of the people, by the people, it doesn't even say it's of the people. It's not of the citizens, by the citizens, for the citizens. I think when we actually started talking about this, I was really big on using more all residents because to me, some of these issues aren't necessarily just a non-citizen versus a citizen issue here. It's about who counts as a resident in Winooski. I've often said that, there could be U.S. citizens who are half-time residents in Winooski that aren't voting here. And so it becomes using more inclusive language is more welcoming. And I think it actually honors the spirit of some of the original government things that what this country was built upon. I get the whole part about maybe we need to do more education, but we've done a lot of things where we went on public access television, encouraging people to watch. There's been multiple news articles, NBC5, the Winooski newsletter that's now being done by the Vermont Center for Research. So there's a lot of opportunities that go beyond the current method of technology, but also uses old print. So there's been a lot of education, and I think the intentionality should be considered if we're going to really educate people about what we're going on and making them feel welcome.
Thanks, Alex.
And I believe if they're in this country, we have welcomed with them with open arms, and they're living a better life. To me, my citizenship status means the world to me. And with the privilege of voting, that's the biggest thing that I love about my citizenship. That I'm able to vote. I'm able to vote who I want to see in office at any level. And a non-citizen that has the intent to get citizenship or is working towards that, when he or she gets that citizenship that day, it's going to feel so great that they can finally vote. And I think that's what being American is all about, but I just feel like you have to have that citizenship in order to vote. And again, this is just my opinion. So
Jim, go ahead.
I just wanted to get back to your question about whether to use all resident or non-citizen. And I want to thank both Commissioner Ian and, well, I guess, Alex, you were a liaison from the school, but thank you for speaking, and thank you, Sam, for sharing. On the issue of non-citizen versus all resident, I was there for the discussion and vote that the commission undertook on that. It was not a quick discussion, and it was a very intentional decision that was not unanimous, and there were people who weren't sure what they were going to say until the end. So I think that the commission did some work to decide that that was a language that they wanted to put forward, and in advertising and doing outreach on this, I think we've had much less time spent on that discussion. It would be worth considering the weight of the commission's time in having come up with that distinction. That said, that's not a hard and fast for me. So if people feel like we need to do outreach on this as this issue, I'm open to that, but I guess it would need to come with that commitment to do robust outreach over the next 3 months.
So go ahead, Liz.
I would just offer up a suggestion that if your concern is about whether something is clear, you could say all residents regardless of citizenship status or something. But the key thing is who belongs here? And are you someone who has a seat at the table? And that's like, are you open? Like, are we going to, as a city, make an effort to involve everyone who lives here? Not everybody has to do it, but let's make an effort. And I just think that defining somebody by what they are not, once more, is not speaking to me being welcome at that table. So all Winooski residents, regardless of citizenship status or something to that effect, I feel like would accomplish your goal if it's really a concern about being abundantly clear. But this is about inclusion, and the reports are that we're not doing enough, we're not communicating enough, and the vote on all resident voting, I think, should be put to the voters. I also think that whether or not it's on the ballot in November, the city council, the city government, and I will do whatever I can, needs to do more to engage our residents in how to vote by mail, having those ballots in multiple languages, engaging multilingual liaisons. Like, this is a huge opportunity for our city to grow, learn from each other, thrive, or just not do that work. And I'm ready to do the work. So I get, like, there could be more outreach, but there will be more outreach. And frankly, there will be a lot more motivation for people to come to hearings and learn if they're actually going to finally get to vote on it.
Thanks, Liz. I like the suggestion that you made of all residents, regardless of citizenship. I do think it's important. That's the crux of the issue for most people, and I want to make sure that that's not lost. If I read this ballot or this charter language that says any person may register to vote that's a legal resident, has taken the oath, 18 years of age or older, it's not clear to me. So I think that would be a workable middle ground. I see support from Amy Howell. Okay. So there are several items here. We have only touched the all resident voting so far. I do have questions about some of the other, like, administrative changes. Are there more questions from folks on the all resident piece, or do we feel like we could move forward with actually voting on this in a future meeting and doing some more legwork in the interim. So that next meeting would be the opportunity to say, yes, we're going to put this on the ballot, or say, no, we're waiting to do that and doing more work.
So we would hold a special meeting then, Christine?
Yes, a special city council meeting. Which I think we could also, there may be a warrant or something, who knows what will pop up, but I think when we push that out, we could be very explicit about this is the main content. That also might drive more engagement. Do we feel good about that?
Yes.
Yes. Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Mike, yes. Yes. Okay. Do you want a formal vote, Jesse?
No. I would like to outline some key questions that I think you're going to need to answer, not necessarily tonight, but at a future meeting. Do you mind if I jump in at this?
Yeah, please do.
So one, I think to where you were just going, Mary, there is a lot of charter language here about a lot of different issues. So what you would be voting to move forward is either all of that language or a portion of that language. It's up to you what you move forward. So the language question, how it appears on the ballot. So do you put one ballot question with all the charter language changes, or do you group them out? I think in Liz's memo, you saw that the commission recommended batching them out into several different votes. And then thirdly is, and this is kind of related to the language question. And then again, Liz mentions this in her memo. There was a discussion at the last commission meeting about protecting the voter checklist. And the commission chose to move forward with protecting it at a higher level than municipal checklists are currently protected, but they did not have the opportunity to see language on it because it was a question that came up at that meeting. So they voted on intent, but not language. So that language is now here. And I'd encourage the council to look at that.
Thanks, Jesse. I would propose that we go forward with the grouping, the batching that the Charter Commission recommended, having all resident by itself, admin changes as a second item, and then a third item for the home rule. Are folks good with that? Okay. I did review the language that Bob put together for us to protect the checklist. I did not have concerns. Did any counselors have concerns with that language?
Could I just ask for a summary of what the protection, so the protections from state statute are? It can't be used commercially and it can't be given to federal agencies. Is that the only difference between what we would do municipally and what is done at the state level?
Yes, so those protections do not exist for municipal lists currently. Thanks.
Yeah, there's one more protection, is that the date of birth, driver's license, telephone number, email address, or last four digits of a social security number cannot be revealed. It's another protection for the statewide voter checklist that would be included in the language that's in the charter amendment before you.
Thank you. So to the last question of the language, right? So it would be this charter language that's been proposed here. If I could, there are two administrative changes I wanted to ask about. One is the section about a counselor resigning their seat to run for mayor. I did listen to the first discussion where y'all talked about scenarios. I missed the conversation, the meeting with the decision point there. So to bring the other folks up to speed, right now, I had to resign my council seat to run for mayor because I still had a year left on the seat, and you can't hold two positions by charter. I had suggested, could we change that so that instead of having to have given up my seat in January, I could have ended it in March, so there wouldn't have been a gap. So say I had not won the election for mayor, I would have resigned my seat as councillor, and Mike would still be sitting here. That wasn't possible. So there were two other suggested scenarios. One is in here, that is that the councillor does not resign their seat. Should they lose, they retain their seat. And then if they win, a special election would be needed to fill it because nobody would have been running for it. It wouldn't have been an open seat already. The third scenario, which I am wondering if perhaps this wasn't possible, that was proposed was to change the date by which you are forced to refill the seat. So I might still have had to resign in January, but the previous council wouldn't have had to put somebody in that seat for the 2 months leading up to town meeting day. Was that a possibility, or was it not possible?
So I'll jump in here, but Liz or others on the commission, feel free to correct me. I don't think we talked about it in that subsequent meeting exactly as you just laid out. I think what the commissioner was looking at that point is what's the kind of most expedient way to a decision that also allows for continued governance, i.e. a fully seated council. And so they felt that having the mayor or having somebody not need to step down to run covers that governance structure up till election day, and then creates a vacancy at which point the council can appoint or have an election. So that's why the language is reflected here. I don't think we got to the point of saying, is it not possible to have the 2 months future resignation date? Is that what you're asking about?
Yeah, so I can appreciate that context about wanting to keep the continuity of governance. And I don't have super strong feelings here, but I will say I don't like the idea of causing a special election. They cost money, they cost staff time, and they also don't have voter turnout. I'm just generally not a fan of them. And second, I also wonder about the idea of should somebody have lost and then they retain their seat with the person who won, is that a bit of a conflict in serving together? Theoretically, we're all adults and it shouldn't be, but it could be.
So the conversation about the first question you outlined about causing a special election is the way the charter is currently written. The council can appoint a new member, or if they don't within 60 days, they're forced into a special election. So I think the commission, like there was enough coverage that if there was the consensus on a council to appoint, then there wouldn't need to be a special election. But that's
okay. I misunderstood. I thought that even if they appoint, at some point there has to be an election for that seat.
No, you can appoint for it would be the longest it would ever be would be for a year.
Okay. Does anyone else have feelings about this issue, or do you want to just accept the recommendation?
I got a question. What are the pros and cons of just keeping it the way it is? I mean, it seems like it's worked in the past, right?
The con is that you have only 4 people on the council during that interim space during the budgeting process. So you lose somebody there, which can be more challenging for votes, can be more challenging if somebody misses a meeting. Now you've only got 3, it's harder to get to quorum. I think also in my specific scenario, which could happen again, it was a bit of a challenge then for me to have to get up to speed and for staff to spend time getting me up to speed, because for 2 months I wasn't a part of any of the executive session discussions on important negotiations.
So, okay. I just didn't think there would be a time to be a 4-member council, because you would nominate a intern counselor. Just
so
like
that's the current status.
Yeah.
Well, and I think there's some downside to that, because you've just got somebody in there for 2 months. You got to get them up to speed. There's just like a lack of continuity. I don't think it's a huge issue in either, like it's not the worst thing in the world in either direction.
Mm-hmm.
My initial suggestion was just that the person wouldn't have to resign until the day before town meeting day, but that's not allowed.
Yes.
I'm hearing no strong feelings. It sounds like this is my own issue, and we should just move forward with what has been proposed or recommended.
We did have fairly robust conversation on this topic in the commission work, and Eric and Hal both weighed in. I shared your concern about having to have a special election and that being a low voter participation event, and that not being very democratic. But through the conversations that we had, for the reasons you named, but also, that it is discouraging to qualified candidates to run for mayor, potentially in this scenario that we have now. So I feel like this is the right way to go.
Thank you. The other sort of admin question I had was about the appointing an HR director. Really, this question more is, why are some positions appointed? Like, and how did that list of positions come to be?
I don't know the history on how the list of positions came to be. It's a pretty typical list in a full service municipality. The reason for the staff request for the HR director language is, in an organization of 130 people, employees, to have an HR professional who's able to, on a general basis, lead HR across, diverse HR needs across that many employees and that many different kinds of employees with unions and whatnot. It's hard to retain people without giving them that title. It's something that is useful for somebody's professional development. So just as we appoint a police chief and a fire chief and public works director that carries those titles, wanted to make that equitable among the leadership team.
Thank you. Are there any other questions about the language that's proposed here? So if we're going to vote on this in the next meeting, it would be approving all of these red line changes that we're looking at here, potentially. So if there's any language here that you would want to see differently, now would be the time to make that suggestion.
Be approving them to go on the ballot, and then the voters decide. Yeah.
Jesse, do you need anything else from us?
I think I have enough guidance to move forward. I may, as I start with Bob putting together documents, I may give you several options of different things for you to change in the meeting. I'd rather have those prepped ahead of time and then have you pick one rather than trying to edit on the fly. But I think I have enough for right now.
That sounds good.
I would recommend that we not set another meeting right now, but follow up and allow people to think about their schedules in the next couple of weeks. And Christine, you and I can talk about that tomorrow.
Yes, we will be in touch to schedule that meeting. Any last questions, comments?
So just to be clear, that meeting will be before the 23rd?
Yes.
Yeah.
keep me posted if there's any outreach or other meetings that you all would like me and or the full Charter Commission engaged in.
Thank you. All right. Let's move to our next item on the agenda. FY21 local agreement tax rate. Angela.
So this is the last piece of the tax rate that needs to be set in order for us to print tax bills tomorrow. State of Vermont allows for a $10,000 exemption on a property tax assessment for veterans who are more than 50% disabled or on medical retirement. The city of Winooski voted historically to increase that exemption to $40,000. So we need to raise what's called the local agreement rate that makes up the difference of that $40,000 on the city side and the $30,000 on the education side, because the state does cover the first $10,000. The math was done out and calculated based on the filings of the veterans exemptions this year. There were 15, one of which is filed as a non-residential property and is charged the non-residential education rate. The rate that is needed to charge all taxpayers to cover these exempted taxes is 0.0028 cents.
This is an administrative thing we have to do every year, right?
Yeah, normally it'd be included in the tax rate calculation that you do all together, but we did not have the education rates before your last meeting.
That's right. Any questions from council? Questions from the public? All right, I would entertain a motion to approve the FY21 local agreement tax rate.
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Amy, second by Jim. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Motion carries. Thank you. I am going to call a 4-minute break. We will reconvene at 8:06.
Hey, John Rauscher. So we have CCRPC, Jonathan and Jason Charest are here. Do you want all three of them in the panelist function for this?
Yeah, so Jonathan will be presenting, I believe, CCRPC will probably just be listening in.
Okay.
Amy, Hal, ready?
Yep, I'm here.
Okay, thank you. Hal, excellent. Okay. Let's reconvene. It is 8:06, so we can start our item E discussion, transportation impact fee presentation. You have some guests with you, John?
Yes, I do. So thanks, everyone. So this is a study that was funded by CCRPC, Chittenden County Regional Planning Commission, all the way back, I think, on the FY19 annual work plan. So this one's been on the back burner for a little while. So as we've sort of progressed projects, we've been working on this. But you know, we were actually looking to present this to you all back in April, the spring, and then of course we had COVID strike. So we figured, you know, in order to try to wrap up this study, we wanted to get this in front of you and start getting some feedback on this study. So as a sort of a high level overview, some of our neighboring municipalities utilize an impact fee, and this impact fee is used to fund capacity increases for their capital projects. So we're looking to kind of see what that looks like for specific to Winooski. And we worked with CCRPC to select RSG consultants who have a lot of expertise in this kind of transportation impact fee study. So we have Jonathan Slason here tonight to give you an overview of the presentation that's in your packet. So with that, I think I'll kick it over to Jonathan, and I'm not sure if I'll be running the slides or who will be, but Paul, maybe you can help us out with that piece.
Hey, John, I can or John, I can if that would be useful.
Yep, that works.
Yeah, that works. We can. We'll hit most of them, I think, Jesse. So hello, everybody. So my name is, as John mentioned, I'm Jonathan Slason with RSG, and pleasure to be with you tonight. I know you've been through already a long meeting, so I want to try to be respectful of your time and really highlight just the major elements of this. And John, I guess just so I'm clear, or Jesse, this is just an informational session at this point, right? There's no actions to be taken at this meeting, right?
Right.
Okay, great. All right, well, so I don't know how much of you have had time to digest what's in here. There is a bit of content and some material, and I also don't know how familiar you are all with impact fees in general, and let alone transportation impact fees. So I'm going to cover some of the basics and just make sure that we can get aligned as we go into more depth, and we'll see how we get on tonight. I'm kind of aiming for 20 minutes or so, if that works for you all. Okay.
That sounds good. Thank you.
All right, Jesse, you want to move ahead? So as an outline of generally what's included in the slides that you were provided is that a description of what are impact fees, the methodology for calculating them, and I think really what is important are the alternatives to impact fees. Why does a community even consider these fees? Because they do increase the cost that gets passed on to new development in your community. And then there's some matter of fact kind of administering some rules and using the fees that are part of the project that we'll work with the city finance department and the accounting staff. So an impact fee at a high level, it means it's a fee, not a tax. And the description and the distinguish is very important, is that it has a specific use case and a specified methodology for the calculation of which. It is not a general revenue that can be applied and used by the city or the jurisdiction. And it is levied as a condition of a land use change, typically a subdivision or a zoning permit. And it would cover existing capital projects or planned capital projects that the beneficiaries would be that new land use development. And these revenues would then compensate the municipality for any of the expenses incurred as part of constructing that infrastructure. And as I mentioned, it can be a recoupment of fees if the city were to invest in excess capacity upfront, with the anticipation that the reason that future land use would benefit from that capacity. Or are we building capacity today or planning for capacity that might be necessary in 5 or 10 years in the anticipation of future land use changes? The general requirements per state statute are that we need a plan that would stipulate or articulates the need for new capacity. And the city of Winooski has done that with the transportation master plan that was recently completed, I think in 2017. And so the city did that first stage of work that was necessary. And within that study, they articulated the levels of service that was being experienced on the roadways, specifically in that plan. But it also talked about sidewalks and bike lanes and other capital items that would benefit the community. And we also have a capital budget and capital program, which is the methodology for saying this is a capital item, and we have a plan for how much it costs and how much the city is willing to invest. And then along with that, we have locations of those projects, the cost estimates, and then lastly, a funding formula. So go ahead, Jesse. So at a very high level, a concept of impact fees is to mitigate for a loss of your standard of service or your level of service. In the left-hand figure here, we have a bit of pavement, bit of road or sidewalk, which as the future occurs, we would have more users on it. And the idea is that each user there experiences a slight decline in their standard of service. They have a little bit less freedom to move around the sidewalk, and that could be equated to any mode that you're discussing here. So same with bike lanes, same with even transit and let alone sidewalks. And so the idea is that it's not extremely clear here, but on the right is that we're expanding the sidewalk area so that we can accommodate more users with an equal amount of space around them. That's the very general philosophy, is that we're maintaining a standard of service. So if we can think about the space around us as we're walking, we're going to expand the capacity of the system, expand the pipes so that we can accommodate more users, and those users would experience a similar experience as they are today. So go on there. So some of the basic criteria is that it has to be rationally linked to new development. And so this means is that new development would be paying for this, and it has to be demonstrated that the new development would impose impacts on current users of this system. And then we have to demonstrate that some of the new users would also benefit from that capacity. There's typically a geographic constraint or consideration to this. City of Winooski, luckily, given its size, we have the luxury that one project in the city is generally going to benefit everybody to some degree within the city. So that's a nice first bullet point checkbox that we're able to do this quite efficiently. And then second bullet point here is that the amount of the fee is proportionate to the fair share of the costs. Simply is that we cannot exceed the costs to do the project. We can't burden new development with costs that exceed the physical costs to do the work. And then the last bullet point is an important one, is that we cannot address existing deficiencies. So in the like of a roadway maintenance is a big issue. We cannot fill our potholes with impact fee dollars. We actually need to widen the roadway if we're talking about cars. We need to add a bike lane if we're talking about bikes. And we need to widen the sidewalk if we're talking about pedestrians. So that's the idea in that bullet point. And then what we have also is that they have to be segregated from the general fund. So that goes along with the idea that it's not a tax, it's a fee. We have to be encumbered or expended within 6 years. So there is a bit of a timeline that we need to be sensitive to. And that we have to identify any other funding sources. And we do have property tax contributions to projects, and we also may have TIF contributions depending on the timing of projects within the city. And this last bullet point kind of goes back to that maintenance and existing deficiencies, but we can't cover our day-to-day maintenance of our system. Now, we've been talking about the city side of things. Developers and landowners also have rights, is that they're going to pay a fee and they have a right to know what they're getting out of that fee. Every development has to have a common unit of measure. And in the transportation world, we're going to be talking about a trip generated. And then we also have developers and anybody that pays the fee have to know that what projects their fees were contributing to. They don't need to know that their dollar was going to that particular project, but they need to know the list of projects that will be funded by these said revenues. Go ahead there, Jesse.
Hold on. To have lost control of this. What happened? All right, let's see if I can do it a different way. All right. Anyone have any hints? Oh, I can do it this way. There we go.
There we go. All right. So we'll keep going down. So the general methodology here is that we first look at how much growth is anticipated in the city. The growth is what necessitates a change of level of service, and we only can charge for the new land use changes. So there's an assumption of growth within this overall process. And then we have to identify the change in standard of service that new growth causes for the existing users in the system. So that's the deficiencies. And then we identify what mitigation or what projects would mitigate that impact. And as part of that those projects, we identify the cost of those projects. And the base fee is simply the cost of the projects divided by the unit of growth, in this case, the number of trips generated by the land use change. And that fee then can be prorated and adjusted but charged to any of the new land use development. So go ahead there, Jesse. We don't need to debate these numbers, but these are numbers that we've been working with the city staff on and the Regional Planning Commission, is that there's a forecast. We're going out 20 years in this case to get a level of growth that we have a magnitude of dollars that are coming in that the city can use. And so it's looking about 250, 260 change in numbers of households or residential units within that 20-year period, which we also, for your all purposes of City Council, we want to be conservative in a way that if we overshoot or overestimate the level of growth, that means that the charge or the fee per unit would be on the lower end, versus if we're conservatively and a little bit more on the lower end of our potential estimate of growth, then the fee is a little bit higher and we cover ourselves in terms of risk management. So it's finding that sweet spot of a tolerance of what is a reasonable forecast of growth. And that's why most of these numbers are coming from the Regional Planning Commission's forecast that has been established at the regional level. And so I mentioned about the households, and then the employment is about 1,500 new jobs are expected within the city over that 20-year period. We can pass through this slide there, Jesse. You all have these extra slides. I'm going to try to get through some of the core pieces. This slide's important really for the bottom line takeaway, which is in the blue and the orange box kind of above it, is that the city of Winooski is already a dense, multifaceted, diverse location, which generates then a lot of trip making, but not always vehicle trip making. And as part of this, then we have to understand, do we want to allocate the fees to vehicle trips only or to all trips? And so we've taken the attempt to saying all users are going to be paying for different infrastructure. And we'll talk about the projects that we've selected here in a minute. But we've basically come up with, out of the growth that we've just discussed, we have an estimate of nearly 1,200 new trips are occurring during the PM peak hour, which is the typical hour of any transportation analysis. However, that's the local piece of what's generated. The city of Winooski, as you know, you're a funnel which attracts, you're unfortunately the recipient of a lot of other regional growth within the city or city within the region. And we estimate about almost 900 new trips are going to occur on your roadways primarily because of other growth in the region. So we have a total of 2,000 new PM peak hour trips that are going to occur on the roadway system that you all own and operate. So we have to be sensitive to both what's caused locally, but also what's using the system regionally. So go ahead there, Jesse. The projects that have been developed through the project team, which has been primarily the consultant side, the Regional Planning Commission, the Public Works, and the planning staff here at the city, we've come up with these 3 projects for your input today. We have the Main Street reconstruction, which would cost the city somewhere around $7 million in total. We also have the East Allen Street project, which would consist of some widening and some shared use path reconstruction. And then we have a general project for a few sidewalks within the city. What we have is a $9.3 million on the left-hand side, and then it goes down to a $3 million on the right. The $3 million is a response to show that we can only pay for new capacity as part of impact fees. Many of these projects rebuild existing infrastructure, and we're not able to pay for those portions of new infrastructure being reconstructed, or that existing infrastructure being reconstructed. So that's where that center column there is an estimate of what the new capacity is as a portion of the overall project. So we're only able to charge the impact fee on that $3 million portion of these projects.
And John, if I can just add a sentence to that, the $7 million you see there obviously is not the full Main Street project. It's just the general fund transportation oriented portion.
Thank you. So as I mentioned earlier, the derivation of the fee is quite simple in practice, is that we have the cost of the projects that we've identified as being growth-related projects that are trying to mitigate the impacts of growth and to provide a standard of service to the current residents and employees within the city. That's the $3 million of new capacity. Then we have the total new trips that are going to, that's the change in trips over this 20-year period that will utilize that capacity to some degree. And we have the cost per trip. That's $1,400 and $1,456. And we have a slide here that discusses a little bit about how that compares to other communities and what that means from a land use development point of view. So let's go on ahead there. So this slide, I am sensitive to time and I want to have Q&A. So we'll just explore a few of these to give you a perspective of what these tables mean, and you can reflect upon it. We have broken it up in terms of residential and non-residential land uses. We've compared some of the most adjacent communities that also have impact fees. And so what we've done here is, in the residential side, a single family dwelling unit generates approximately 1 trip per PM peak hour. And then during the multifamily units generates around 0.45, 0.5, depending on the density of the multifamily dwelling units that we're discussing. So that's why we have the 1456 there in orange in the center of the screen for the per single family dwelling unit. And then the multifamily at 675. And so if you just look down in that first table, you can see how it compares to some of the other communities. And Burlington is an outlier. They have not updated their fees in many, many years. And it's just lower than other communities. And we'll note that Williston just updated theirs as of October of 2019. South Burlington's in the process of updating theirs, and most likely it could double from the values that you see here. Then the non-residential side follows a typical pattern, is that it's kind of in between, more or less the most recent update, which is Williston's, and then South Burlington's. And so this just gives you context to understand where the city might fit. It's right now, I think it's in between, but frankly, it might be the lower of, if we compare Winooski, South Burlington, and Williston after South Burlington finishes their update. I realize that from city council's point of view, in some cities, there's a perception issue of understanding, are we disincentivizing development where we want it? Are we charging too high? And there is a legal justification for this fee, but then there's a very real political discussion element. And that's the purpose of being here tonight, is to inform you of where I think the legal justification is clearly able to justify these fees. But as a city council, you have the latitude to reduce the fees however you see fit. And And I have a slide that I'll discuss here in a moment about where that goes. And I'm going to pass by this Act 145 piece because it's slightly distraction there, and maybe we can get back to there if there's a question to it, or I can provide John any commentary for you all if you're curious about it. So this slide here underscores why this fee exists in the first place. Is that as any community that experiences growth and development, and the city of Winooski has seen a lot over the last 20 years, we could do a number of things as growth happens. Is that we don't charge anybody anything for any development, and therefore we would accept lower levels of service as more users enter the system. We don't accept that for water. We don't accept that for other things. There's a finite capacity. Transportation is a little bit different. Is that we can generally accept a certain amount of tolerance of congestion until it gets too much. So there's that one option, is simply don't levy any charges, don't do any mitigation. The second bullet point is what happens most often, which is the ad hoc. The DRB process and the Act 250 process says, you've caused this mitigation, you need to mitigate it, and it goes ad hoc by ad hoc. And it doesn't allow the city or the jurisdiction to really guide what those mitigations might be. And frankly, you might have one development go into an area and they might do a mitigation that frankly the city doesn't agree with. And so you have very little latitude with those quasi-judicial boards and the city process. So localized taxes and authorities is what the city has done in the past with the TIF district, is to identify set investments to leverage certain other investments. And water districts and other things are very similar, and that you can use a set group of users to fund a specific improvement. That requires a bunch of administrative oversight and other processes, and so that is an option, but it has its own cons or disadvantages. And then the second to last bullet point is the general fund, that's the tax, broad-based revenues, property tax primarily, sometimes sales tax, other ways to generate revenue, and then you have discretion as to where to spend it. But the disadvantage is then that if you're paying for new capacity or projects, such as the three that were listed there, you'd be taxing your current resident base for potentially the beneficiaries that don't currently live there. And so there is a rationale for this last bullet point, which is the impact fee approach, which is that you're levying a fee on that new development to mitigate its impacts. And the way these projects are established is that the city then gets the decision to say, we're willing to know there's a level of growth. We don't know exactly where it's going to go in the city, but these projects will benefit that growth, and we're going to make sure that they pay their fair share toward those projects. And so the idea is that growth pays for itself. So I'm trying to think here about the next steps in administering. Unfortunately, I had an issue with the slides, but just to quickly go through the next steps just verbally here is that this slide, John, I was prepared to skip unless there's a question. I know we just talked about some of the tax issues, but I'm curious about posing one or two questions for you all as I explore the next steps. Here is that we're ready to finalize the impact fee study. We need to confirm that these projects are of interest to you all and that you see merit in them. We also need to verify that the fee is a politically reasonable one. And as part of the fee, though, we need to discuss whether there's any exemptions for specific land uses, as much like the previous example there with the veterans reduction in the tax rate, is that we're able to exempt any specific land uses that we see fit that wouldn't pay an impact fee. So some communities like to exempt community facilities of some sorts, whether they're public or private, child care building uses, affordable housing units, laundromats, some other corner stores, small retail, if you're under a certain square footage. Certain communities decide various services are of community value that we're not willing to impose an additional burden, financial burden, on developing them in the city. And so the impact is that those revenues would be therefore lost, and the general fund would have to make up any of that difference for any of the land uses that we would exempt. That's basically what would happen. So the other next steps are that we would prepare an ordinance, because this is the first impact fee that the city would have. So we're going through that process and getting a draft ready. And then there would be an effort to work with the finance department as well as the manager, Jesse, and the city staff to ensure that the administration part of this would be successful from day one. So I've given a fairly quick overview there. I think we're right on time, but not for Q&A. So I'm happy to stay as long as you are to discuss this proposal, answer any questions.
Thank you for walking us through that. I think first off, I would ask if any counselors have questions about just generally how the impact fee works or what's being proposed here. Amy?
Hi, yes, I was actually able to attend the municipal infrastructure meeting when you first talked about this, so I feel like I got a pretty great understanding. And if I'm remembering correctly, I think one of the things you had said was essentially if local municipalities don't adopt this, then the state will essentially tack on that fee to developers. Is that correct? Because I think that's an important thing to point out, that like if we're not charging it, they're still going to get charged, but just at the state level.
Yeah, what has happened is the state has refined their process. About 6 months ago, that was true. Since then, the state now is levying, and there was that slide there with the Act 145 fees, which was to give context as to the magnitude of the fee. The Act 145 fee is a statewide impact fee that's levied on specific projects. And in the city of Winooski, most of them would only be the Exit 16 project because of the proximity of where the development is. And regardless of what the city of Winooski adopts for its own impact fee, this $585, which is the fourth line up in that last table, or the first line, that fee would be assessed by VTrans if any development triggers the Act 250 process. So that will happen regardless. And the city has its own latitude to impose additional fees, which would be this impact fee. So it would be a net addition now.
Thank you for clarifying.
Yep.
I'm going to stop sharing my screen, but I'm happy to pull it back up if people have questions about the slides.
Jim?
Thanks for that presentation. That definitely helped provide an overview. I'm curious if you would be able to articulate there's the disincentivizing development, but if you had to try and articulate the biggest complaint from a developer about an impact fee, what would you characterize it as?
Biggest, I'm going to flip it first and say the biggest benefit, because there are benefits to this that developers have appreciated, is that the assumption, and this has to be clarified, but the local DRB process would in essence change once this gets established, and that the offsite impacts are basically saying we don't care anymore about them because the impact fee is there to deal with offsite impacts. Now, that only assumes that the land use being envisioned is in agreement with the transportation plan that was done preceding this, and the land use is in keeping with the current zoning and current regulations. So if there's a big change in zoning requested by a land use change, then kind of everything's out the door and they need to go through a local process. However, if we're talking about a zone building that's going to change intensity slightly, it's already been part of the city's vision. They go through the local process and they just evaluate their own site design, but their offsite impacts is now addressed. And so that's a benefit from the developer's review, is that it's a more predictable process going forward. They pay a fee and they go forward. And the fee is often rolled up into their initial financing piece. So the magnitude of the fee is sometimes less of a concern than the predictability and the time benefit of potential savings through this process. So to answer your question, though, the disadvantage is that it does raise the cost of development. And there have been studies that said, particularly for income-sensitive housing, this has been a burden in the past, an acknowledged burden. And so that's why I brought up that last question, is that many communities do adopt a statement or a waiver process that if you have a perpetually affordable unit, you would exempt them from impact fees. And therefore you partially address that. So in the absence of that type of waiver, these fees just increase the net cost that will get passed on to any new tenant or any new resident or any new business in the city. And as I put in that slide, if the city deems these projects worthy, you'd be passing on that cost to them eventually anyway through the form of a general fund increase. And now it's being front loaded in terms of the new development, in terms of their portion of that responsibility.
Councilors, that has me thinking about our previous discussion about the incentives in form-based code that are not working for like green development and affordable housing. However, I believe specifically it was about housing. What we've been trying to incentivize is housing that is affordable to middle income folks, like around AMI. And I'm wondering if that is something, John, that you have seen as an exemption versus like capital A affordable housing.
Yeah, I've seen a variety of cities do different ways to incentivize that. So there's an acknowledgement that every land use has an impact, and then it's simply saying which land uses do we want to reallocate said funds. So if there's a commitment from the community to say we're going to use general fund dollars to subsidize, I don't want to mince my words here, is that we will be shifting funds from one fund to another. And if it's agreement that we want to lower the impact fee for any certain land use, you have complete latitude to do so. And there are examples of various, sometimes it's 100% waiver under a certain AMI, and then sometimes it's then just a phased reduction.
I think that would be interesting to see those examples, something that we could consider.
Florida, if you're comfortable with that, that would be Tampa primarily is what I'm thinking of.
And to be clear, we could change those that exemption. How difficult would it be? Say that that is no longer a priority. We want to prioritize something else. Could we change that exemption on our own?
Yeah, you have this is kind of the legal process to have a set study that says you can't charge more than this for these said projects. You have then the political ability to lower the fee for anybody and for any time and for any purpose, acknowledging that you have an obligation, though, that is important to convey here, which hasn't been expressed so far. But once a city adopts an impact fee, and as soon as you start collecting any dollars, any fees, there is a legal obligation to make good on those projects. And those projects could change a little bit as long as they provide a similar service to the community. But that's the legal requirement, Mayor, is that we have a legal obligation to complete a similar project that would benefit the city, but you're able to reduce the fee whatever makes sense. So simply means that you'll have to find money to complete the project if you're not charging that land use for that fee anymore.
Jim?
Along those lines, before the ordinance is established or the ordinance is put in that establishes the fees, we could rebalance and so shift cost from affordable housing developments to other, like the total funds that we'll take in will be the same because we're charging a slightly higher fee to other land uses. Can we do that in the study? Or I guess my question is, if we go back and change it later, we're going to collect less money overall in the impact fee if someone builds that type of land use. Do we have the choice to rebalance the fee beforehand or do we also, because the study's been done, we still have to reduce the overall income we'll take in if we set exemptions?
Well, what's going to happen is that we have not built a forecast for, let's say, different income percentages of housing. So we don't have an estimate of whether it's going to be full market rate or some affordable units, perpetual affordable units. So right now we simply have an estimate of how much housing might be constructed over the next 20 years. And we have an estimate of the number of person trips that they're going to likely generate. What happens is, as soon as you waive any of them, simply if that type of land use were to increase in the number, we could make a rough assumption to say, all right, that's now taking out of that total 260 households that we assume, and therefore we're losing that said revenue. And then annually, the city will know where you sit as to you'll have to use general funds to offset that waiver process. Right now, we don't know what that estimate is, and it's not part of this calculation.
Thanks.
Yep.
Could you please reiterate the ask? What is it that we need to provide today?
Well, I think your political viewpoint is important as to what's the vision for the city. You have an idea there of how the fee compares to South Burlington and to Williston. Whether that fee is reasonable from a political standpoint, that's an important process. Typically, in these studies, it goes through some vetting, and often when I'm in front of the city council, it's a yay or nay, and sometimes sometimes you surprise people, sometimes you don't, and so the feeling of the fee is important. So that's one ask, and then the second one is from a city philosophy point of view. Can we work with Eric and the planning department to identify specific land uses that the city deems worthy of an exemption? And acknowledging that if the city were to develop those land uses, then we would just need to obligate general funds to offset that loss in revenue.
So on the second point, I would say yes. I think that is the way to go on the exemptions, and then bring us back recommendations. I don't think we're prepared to make decisions on that at all right now.
Yeah. I don't know. Is Eric still on the call?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Thumbs up.
To the first question, do you know when South Burlington is supposed to finish their revision?
We're working with them. They have a long list of projects they're trying to prioritize. That's why I think it's the political number that will most likely affect where they land. And I have a gut feelings that they're trying to target somewhere around $2,000 a trip.
I would just say
so doubling what you see.
Jesse, did you have your hand raised?
Well, you don't have to vote on anything tonight, and you don't have to make a decision on anything tonight. I think, this is a project we've been working on for several years as the council charged us with diversifying revenue streams. And this is a revenue that we don't collect that our surrounding communities do. So I think, and from my perspective, it's enough for you for you all to generally say, yes, this is still something we're interested in pursuing, since this has kind of been sitting on the shelf since right around COVID. If you say to us, yes, this is generally something we're looking to explore, then I think staff through Eric and John and Heather can go back and model out some recommendations of, if we set an impact fee at X with these projects, what would that mean and where would that place us in other communities, and give you some ranges of that. I don't think you need to say tonight, it's at $40,000 total for this and this and this. We can give you some professional recommendations on that.
I'm certainly interested in this, particularly with the consideration of exemptions. We need more revenue. We need to diversify our revenue, but we also need to be conscientious of increasing the cost of housing. But I think I think we're still interested in this. And I said that without anyone else speaking up.
I'm still interested in it. I'm curious how the Planning Commission would because I mean, they're looking at these issues too. So thinking about how we don't duplicate or override our benefits we get from different incentives. I'm just curious how that'll intersect.
Well, I think it would be, and Eric, you could speak to this. I think it would be worth discussing with them potentially. I've definitely heard them be interested in us having an impact fee.
Right. I would just hate to see our impact fee incentive undercut our parking-based affordability fee. Like I'd like to make sure that those things work in concert instead of overriding or.
And they have not even discussed. They have not discussed another incentive. So I think this discussion could inform that work, that effort. I think I saw head nods that we like what you suggested, Jesse.
Okay. So John, we can, between John Rauscher, myself, Heather, and Eric, we can give you some more guidance to move on to the next step.
Great. Well, I really appreciate your time tonight, and everybody from the city side has my contact information, and it might be part of the slide deck that was handed off. So don't hesitate if there's any questions that do come up. I'm happy to field those.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us.
All right. Appreciate it. You have a wonderful evening.
You too. We move on to item F, approval Hickok Street Reconstruction Phase 2 bid award. John.
There we go. So this is a request to authorize the city manager to sign a contract with Munson Earth Moving Corporation in the amount of $1,508,053.20. This work is to complete the remaining reconstruction work on Hickok Street. So that scope of work includes storm sewer, sanitary sewer replacement and rehabilitation, new curbing, new sidewalk, and new pavement section for the street, including West Lane. So the bid amount is below the engineer's estimate, and it is below the project budget. And we did actually receive the formal bid analysis from the consultant engineer this morning. So in my in the memo packet I sent you, I had a caveat in there that that was still forthcoming. So we did receive that, and it matches what was presented to you in the memorandum. Just one other note. So as you know, this is a rebid from the earlier June 1st bid, where we only received one bid that was above our project budget. So we're happy to see a lot more bidders on this round. And with this bid and the previous water main work that was done last summer, right now we're looking at approximately 1.2 million under our $3.7 million bond budget. So we're pretty comfortably under the bond vote. That 3.7 million, as I showed in the memo, I broke it up for each fund, general, sewer, water fund, so you can kind of see where those actual estimates come out at. So with that, can you answer any questions?
Any questions or concerns from council? All right, nice to see this moving forward and under budget. I'd entertain a motion to approve the Hickok Street Reconstruction Phase 2 bid award.
So moved.
Motion by Mike, second by Hal. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Motion carries. Thank you. Stay with us for item G, approval 2020 street resurfacing bid award.
Yes, so this is another request for city manager authorization to sign contracts. This is with Frank W. Whitcomb in the amount of $56,075. This paving work includes Maple Street, the entire width, entire length, and Union Street, the entire length. We are maintaining those speed tables that are on those streets as well. So we did come in significantly under our FY21 budget of $135K. So we are also reviewing potentially adding additional streets for this year's paving. What we did find was the asphalt numbers were pretty low this year, so that's why we're able to see some pretty good bids from contractors.
Any questions or concerns on this one? Would someone like to move to approve the 2020 street resurfacing bid award?
So move.
Second.
Motion by Mike, second by Jim. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Motion carries. Thank you. Item H, on-street paid parking expansion downtown.
Great. So this is a request to expand on-street paid parking for the street block of West Center, Weaver Street, West Canal, and Mayo Street. I think Peking Duck Block is the former name of, probably what most people know that. So per chapter 15, the parking chapter, this action can be performed by council via resolution, which we've included one in your packet. The three main reasons we're making this request is one is it sort of cleans up some of the redevelopment, downtown redevelopment scope. This area was always envisioned to be expanded paid parking. So we're looking to just kind of get that paid parking added to our inventory. It also provides some consistency. There's paid parking to the north and to the east in this area. And finally, also, we're looking to create some higher turnover for this parking area. It's within walking distance to the retail and restaurant spaces to the east. So that's one of the other primary reasons we're looking to add this into our inventory. And I will also say, I think I mentioned this in the memo. So, we probably will be coming to you again with additional paid parking expansion as form-based code and some of those districts get built out. So this probably won't be the last time you see a paid parking inventory request come through.
Any questions or concerns on this one? Amy?
John, can you tell me if that area is 2-hour parking right now or if it's just sort of open-ended?
It's free parking. There's no regulations on it.
Okay. The reason I ask is that I think a lot of people who are residents of that new building, I think it's called Mill something apartments, are probably parking there pretty long term. And I have some apprehension about turning it over to paid parking without sort of notifying those folks or talking to the building owner about it. A long time ago when I lived above Papa Frank's, a very similar thing happened to me where my parking spot was just sort of one day became a 2-hour parking spot and it caused all sorts of problems. And I'm just thinking about the residents that live in that area, not only in that apartment complex, but there are several other apartments nearby that may be utilizing that street. So that would be my biggest concern.
Yeah, same with us. So I mentioned that kind of in passing in the memo that, one of the key things that we have to do is reach out to Redstone, who owns those developments prior to doing anything. We need their help with signage anyways. There's not a lot of room on the sidewalk. John, Audie, I don't know if you want to chime in on some earlier discussions you've had with folks there.
Yeah, so when Pekin Duck was redeveloped, that whole block was closed off for construction. And the plan was always to reclaim those spaces, and we just never have. As redevelopments happen, we need to be, it's a policy level discussion of, there needs to be very pointed decision making of, is the on-street parking for business or for residential use? And I think this is a perfect example of those residents have, a large portion of that parking in that block has become exclusive to that redevelopment project. And I think as we redevelop around the city, that's something you need to be very mindful of happening. It creates issues in the residential areas. It impacts others. So it was never meant to be, on-street parking. We don't have the inventory to supply parking for each development project. The zoning processes are very specific in making sure that these projects accommodate parking. And in most cases, that is not just exclusive on-street parking. So I don't know if that makes sense to folks, but this would finish out the block to Mayo, down both West Center and West Canal. And it was always part of that plan as we rolled out the new the paid parking.
So I agree on the outreach piece. Like, obviously folks need a heads up about this change. Eric can correct me if I'm wrong, but that's a newer development. So I would imagine that those units, they were already required to build that building with 2 spots per tube. I forget the exact numbers, but that the parking should on site already be reasonable enough that those folks don't really have to park in the street. They're parking in the street because the spot is directly in front of their door.
So that development came in before I was on staff, but in theory, yes, there should be adequate parking on site for that project as the regulations would have required at the time.
Sorry, just to clarify, so that means that they have their own parking lot or something similar?
Yes, I was
in the middle. Sorry.
I was acting zoning at the time. So that has, each of those units have their exclusive under their living space garage dedicated to themselves. And then there's a surface lot sandwiched in between the buildings. The new building and the old Pekin Duck. That also included some visitor spaces. It was always envisioned visitors would be part of the paid parking as they came in to visit. But the residents themselves would utilize the garages and or the surface lot that exclusive to that development.
Thanks, John. I didn't realize you had done the interim zoning position.
John has done lots of positions.
Yeah. Mike?
I got a question. Amy, you read my mind. I want to know, is there a way to offer residents that may need that parking spot? Would the city offer them parking passes for a season, or is there any room in there for residential parking with a parking pass?
So right now, other than the long-term parking contracts on the Cascade Garage, we don't have any parking passes downtown. That is something many communities do, and we could look into over time. That's one of the things that's most challenging about not having any staff dedicated to parking in the city is, researching that, writing the ordinance for it, administering it, blah, blah. But it certainly could be a long-term goal.
I believe there's other opportunities for those residents too to possibly enter into other parking agreements with some others that have some capacity in that direct area.
Oh, John, we don't want them to negotiate with other people. We want them to negotiate with the city.
Are there any other questions from council? Would someone like to move to approve the on-street paid parking expansion?
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Jim, second by Hal. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Motion carries. Thank you. Item I, grant approval, Better Roads Grant, Elm Street Stormwater Outfall Rehab.
Yes, so this is a request to accept the VTrans Better Road Grant in the amount of $11,812. It does require 20% local match that would come out of the sewer fund, which equates to $2,953. The purpose of this grant is to rehabilitate an existing stormwater outfall near Elm Street. This conveys stormwater runoff to the Winooski River, and it's a project that's been identified through our phosphorus control study, and we've been working with CCRPC to try to identify a grant that would help us perform these improvements. So this work would go towards our MS4 phosphorus threshold regulatory requirements. So that's why we're pursuing it, and it gets us just one step closer to trying to meet those targets.
Any questions or concerns from council? Would someone like to move to approve the Better Roads Grant?
So moved.
Is that motion by Amy, second by Mike? All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Motion carries. Thank you. Moving on to Ray this time. Item J, position descriptions of Recreational Programs Manager and Parks and Community Garden Manager.
Hello. So we, as folks I believe know, have had 2 vacancies in our recreation positions recently, and wanted to take that opportunity to kind of revisit those positions and make sure that as we go to rehire, they made sense. So we did do a little bit of retooling with the 2 positions that we had. Just for context, before we'd had a recreation and parks manager and then a recreation assistant that reported to that manager. What we're doing here, proposing to do here, is have 2 separate managers that report up to me, but one that's focused exclusively on recreational programming full-time, and the other, which is a 28-hour position focused on parks and community gardens. And given, I think, the needs coming up here around our Parks and Open Space Plan, which is coming to a conclusion here pretty soon, as well as, I think, a real need for some increased focus around details around logistics related to COVID programming-wise, felt like having those 2 positions realigned in this way made a lot of sense for us. So happy to answer any questions, but I think hopefully fairly straightforward what was shared.
Thanks, Ray.
Yeah.
Any questions from council? Amy?
Can you explain what providing life cycle and place-wide programming means in each job description, and if that's something that we need to include? Because I'm just wondering if the general public will understand it.
Yeah. So in terms of life cycle programming, I think the idea there is really sort of, I think the other way it's often heard is cradle to grave, really looking at programming for folks across the full age spectrum in our community. And then in terms, I think place-wide is the other term there. Again, just really looking at programming across the city and trying to be really diverse in terms of where and how we're providing services. So, certainly we can wordsmith that if that is confusing, but.
So I also have to take, Ray is trying desperately to take one for the team here. That's absolutely a last minute ad by me, not by him, with the intent of one of the things that Ray articulated earlier, but like we're really trying to de-silo his department and not have it be library and rec and thrive, but really have that whole team be thinking in a coordinated way about programming across the life cycle and across our public facilities. So there was nothing else in that position description that you saw that referred to that collaborative nature. So I threw that in at him at the last moment. So He does not own that. I own that.
I support the concept.
So we can certainly simplify it if you would like. You can approve with a request that we simplify it.
I personally would like that. I think it's very jargony, and that people applying are going to have no idea what that means.
Yeah, we can definitely simplify that language. As long as that concept makes sense, we can find some better language in that spirit.
I'm all right with that too. Would someone like to move to approve with the suggested change?
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Mike, second by Amy. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Motion carries. Thank you.
Great, thank you.
Item K, housing tasks update and discussion with Heather.
Hi, all. I'm going to try to keep this short and sweet. I did give you a memo that I think pretty clearly walked through it, but at the July 6th City Council meeting, as you'll recall, there were concerns expressed by Council about housing stabilization in our community, specifically looking at issues of a concern about there being evictions and foreclosures coming in the future after the emergency order is lifted. So really wanting to have a handle on where we are as a community with that. And with that, there were a series of tasks that were considered to be assigned to staff and to the Housing Commission. I've given you a bulleted list of those tasks. Many of these have already been completed. So we did send out a one-page stuffer on housing resources with the utility bill. We did send out the rental registry information and requested information back from them with a bunch of survey questions about concerns of non-payment and issues with possible evictions coming. And we also included the housing stabilization resources in that mailing as well. The Housing Commission reconvened on the 27th, I believe it was, so last Monday. And we went over and discussed some of the concerns that had been raised by City Council. By that point in time, I had a little more information that I was able to share with the Housing Commission about the legal restrictions on some of the funds that we had discussed, possibly to provide direct assistance to residents of our community. So I reached out to the director of grants with the VCDP program, which is where we got the funds for the Housing Trust Fund. And she directed us not to try to use the Housing Trust Fund grants for that purpose. And that was really about the duplication of effort that I spoke about, duplication of benefit that I spoke about last time with what the state is doing with the rental stabilization funds and also with the mortgage assistance program. They are from the same pot of funds at a federal level. So we can't use that. We could potentially, based on the dispositive provisions of the CDC reserve funds, use those funds. So we discussed that as a Housing Commission and really what are our recommendations for our work plan moving forward. And primarily what the Housing Commission recommended was rolling over a lot of the unfinished business that we had from our last year's work plan, mostly regarding the Housing Trust Fund and getting that up and running. And then adding as part of it to pursue Vermont Community Foundation funding in order to hire a consultant to do a lot of the data gathering that was requested at the last meeting. I did reach out to the Vermont Community Foundation, had a very positive conversation with Sarah Waring there. And I do have a meeting scheduled for tomorrow to talk about that a little further. There's not an application process per se for these emergency COVID funds. So it really is more a matter of making a request, having a few conversations, and they make awards accordingly from there. However, we went in asking for over $1 million because we thought maybe, why not seed some funds? So we went all in on that, not just the consultant, but, let's seed some funds where we can do direct assistance to our community. The average award for those are $50,000. So I have significantly scaled back the ask and will be going in looking for a consultant. And basically the way the Housing Commission discussed it was we would pursue the funds, hire a consultant, do the data gathering to get a baseline of where we are as a community. And then in a phased way, if we find that there is a problem, then we would ask the consultant to go looking for funds that we could potentially use to do direct assistance. And if we got that assistance, then we would have the consultant create a program for distributing those funds. And the Housing Commission would then review applications for that and make recommendations to City Council. So that is the very short overview of what the Housing Commission has recommended we do going forward. And that was a unanimous vote in approval of doing that approach. Jim, do you have anything to add to that as the liaison who was there?
No, as always, Heather, you've covered it quite well. Thank you.
Thanks for putting this all together. I think what you've just outlined makes sense as far as viability or feasibility of working with the Community Foundation. Could you clarify for me in the memo, withdrawal of $200,000 of the CDC funds would result in an additional $100,000 in interest? Is this because there would be some sort of early withdrawal? Is that the issue?
If we decided to utilize the CDC reserve funds, that was initially allocated to buy down the debt on.
Oh, I see.
So if we decided to reallocate that and not do that, then there would be an additional $100,000 that we would pay over the life of the bond for that.
I see. Okay. Okay, that makes sense. I also, if you could clarify, A, B, C, D, these uses for the CDC funds, when I read through those, it didn't sound to me like we could use this.
The way that I was seeing it was promoting future housing opportunities by preventing people from homelessness.
Okay.
That's how I was reading it. And I think that we have widely interpreted these dispositive provisions in the past. So I felt like there was probably a way we could do it. I have not vetted this through legal, so we would have to do that as well. Although I think my recommendation and the recommendation of the Housing Commission would be to look for another funding source in order to be able to stand up a program.
I agree. Jesse, were you about to say something?
I was just going to say, I realized that this is on as an approval item, and I'm not sure unless you want to change the direction that's in the memo, I don't think there's anything in here for you to approve.
Okay. Did other folks have questions? All right. Thank you for the update. Thank you, Commission. Moving on to our last item. Jesse, I'm a little unclear why this is on here as a regular item and then an executive session.
Because I think it is worthwhile to tell the community generally what
I see.
we're doing, and I'm happy to do that intro if you would like.
Would you please? Thank you.
Sure. So the next agenda item is about a employee grievance hearing. In our union contracts and in our personnel policies, there are policies for how employees can disagree with an action a department head or myself take. And the final process in that grievance process is to bring it to you. So they are, in this case, an employee is grieving a decision I made, and you are the neutral body that hears that grievance. So for the public's edification, so that's what the council will be considering. This is done in executive session by statute to protect the personnel nature of these conversations, although any decision you make will ultimately become part of the public record. So that's the background for public transparency that I wanted to give, and I would recommend that you take the 2 votes necessary to enter into executive session, taking myself, Phoebe Townsend, Chief Hebert, and our attorney, Karen Stackpole, with us, as well as parties you might want to include.
Thank you. So first, I'm looking for someone to move to find that grievances where premature general public knowledge would clearly place the municipality at a substantial disadvantage, and pursuant to 1 VSA 312E, regarding quasi-judicial proceedings concerning a former employee grievance. Would put us at a disadvantage, and so we should move to executive session. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Hal, second by Jim. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Did you say aye, Mike? I didn't hear.
Aye. Can you hear me? Okay.
Yes. Okay. And so, second, I would entertain a motion to enter into executive session to hold this grievance hearing, inviting Jesse Baker, Karen Stackpole, Rich Cassidy, Jack Parlon, Rick Hebert, Phoebe Townsend, and the former employee.
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Jim, second by Amy. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Motion carries. So we are going to move to a different Zoom meeting for this executive session. We will discuss only this grievance. No other city business will be discussed. We will then adjourn our council meeting. Everyone should have the link in their inbox. Let me know if you don't.